Good evening, night owls, and welcome to Whisper Crowley. Tonight, I will guide you into a world of darkness, hoping to help you relax and unwind. Perhaps some of you will even drift into a haunting yet soothing sleep. Before we begin, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. And now, we begin. I recently signed up for OnlyFans, and I need to share this experience that completely changed my life. I feel it's important to tell what happened, especially to warn other people who might be thinking about following the same path. I'm 20 years old, my name is Clara, and today I live a reality very different from what I imagined just a few months ago. My dad currently lives with my stepmother in Phoenix, and our contact happens only during holidays or special occasions. My story begins when I turned 15 and lost my mother to cancer. Living with my stepmother was always complicated. To be honest, there was never a good relationship between us. That's why as soon as I turned 18, I decided to leave home. I wanted independence and to take care of my own life. You know how it is. I got a job at a beauty salon in downtown Austin, Texas. What I earned there wasn't enough, and I really needed extra income to survive. That's when a coworker named Luna told me about a platform called OnlyFans. Everyone knows the reputation this site has and the risks involved with this type of work. But at that time, I was inexperienced and naive. So I thought, why not try? I ended up creating an account using my real name, Clara Davis. After watching how other users worked, I realized it was possible to make good money showing your body. Initially, I felt ashamed, but gradually, I started posting photos in provocative clothes until I decided to show my face too. Within a few weeks, I had gained many followers and received various comments and special requests. Several users would offer between $50 and $60 for more intimate or personalized content. I wasn't too worried about the consequences. The money was tempting, and my job was simply posting photos and chatting with clients. Obviously, I hid everything from my parents because I knew they would never approve. I was certain my dad would be furious if he found out. I confess it scared me to think about possible reactions, so I preferred to keep it secret. Fortunately, business was going well and my account was constantly growing. One night, returning from the salon, I went to change and decided to take some photos to relax. My house is small and made of wood, very modest. I was in the bedroom, getting ready in front of the mirror, when something caught my attention at the window. Through it, I have a clear view of the street where I live. At that moment, I noticed a pickup truck parked right in front of my house, which caused me unease, because there was a man in the driver's seat watching me directly. He had large eyes and a disturbing facial expression with a somewhat twisted smile. What was most shocking was that even though he realized I had noticed his presence, he showed no intention of leaving. He remained motionless, staring at me with that terrifying look. At first, I imagined he was just someone passing by who would soon leave. So I continued with my activities, but with each photo I took, I looked back and he was still there, eyes fixed on me, showing a frightening obsession as if he were a predator studying his prey. Terror began to take hold of me at that instant. Without hesitation, I closed all the curtains, turned off the lights, and stayed in complete silence, hoping he would give up and leave. I waited several minutes until I heard the sound of the pickup's engine starting and the vehicle driving away. The night became an eternity, and when dawn broke, I couldn't stop thinking about that disturbing look. The next day, when I accessed my OnlyFans account, I came across a very strange comment from a follower named Tyler who had responded to one of my photos from the previous night. "You don't need to hide from me. I'm here watching you." At that moment, I understood it was the same person who had terrorized me the night before. I couldn't believe what was happening. How had he discovered where I lived? This was a mystery to me. The guy was clearly obsessive. I felt terrible, very angry at myself for trusting this online community. But it also deeply bothered me to know he knew my address. Unfortunately, the problems didn't stop there. One day, while driving back home after work, I noticed a pickup truck was following me. Initially, I didn't pay attention. I thought it was a coincidence. But when I stopped at a traffic light, the vehicle positioned itself exactly next to my car, and to my horror, it was Tyler. I immediately recognized those frightening eyes when he stared at me through the window. He didn't say a word, just pierced me with that cold and intimidating look. I felt extremely uncomfortable and anxious, desperately waiting for the light to turn green so I could quickly escape that situation. I kept the windows closed, but at that moment, Tyler made a bizarre gesture, as if he were calling an animal, and suddenly spat on my window as if it were some kind of sick provocation. I was completely paralyzed, without reaction, and without knowing how to proceed, watching that individual drive away in his pickup until he disappeared. That night, I couldn't sleep a single minute. I just cried thinking about everything I was experiencing. Obviously, I wanted to go to the police, but I feared my dad would discover the whole situation. Finally, my first action was to completely delete my OnlyFans profile and end that phase, because I just wanted him to stop stalking me. In the days that followed, when I missed work for a few days, my friend Luna came to visit me. I confided in her and told her all the details of what I was facing with this man. Luna suggested that maybe it would be better for me to move to my dad's house where I would have more security, and that it would be wise to tell my parents about the situation. I ended up following her advice. The following week, my dad showed up at my house. After much fear and hesitation, I sat down with him and explained the whole problem, describing how dangerous this person was and how he constantly stalked me. Naturally, he was very angry with me for making that decision, but he also showed relief knowing I was okay. We agreed to go to the police the next morning. But that same night, just when I thought everything was being resolved, something terrible happened. It was approximately 11:30 at night, and I was sleeping in my room. Since the walls were thin, I could hear the television from the living room where my dad was watching a game. But suddenly I heard a strange noise, like something gently tapping on the window. I immediately thought he had returned. Without making noise, I got up cautiously and approached the window to try to see him outside. My intention was to catch him and call the police immediately. I crouched down and crawled across the floor to avoid being seen. I moved the curtain just a little to peek, and when I looked, I had a terrible fright. It was exactly that same sinister face, that empty and disturbed look, pressed against the window glass. I have no words to describe what I felt at that instant. I was completely immobilized, heart racing, unable to look away. He remained without blinking or moving for a few seconds, and then raised his head, offering me a smile that seemed to come directly from hell. I screamed with all the strength I had and fell to the floor. At that same moment, my dad came running into the room and witnessed the whole scene. Seeing Tyler there, my dad shouted, "You're a psychopath. I'm going to end you." He grabbed a baseball bat he kept under the bed and ran out toward him. Tyler didn't expect this reaction and in panic ran toward his pickup to escape. But my dad was more agile. He went after him, and I also ran outside, seeing my dad strike Tyler's head with the bat. Tyler screamed in pain and fell to the ground, writhing, but then began to utter horrible words directed at my dad. "Your daughter is a prostitute. How dare you attack me because of that woman?" But the worst was yet to come. In a completely unexpected move, Tyler pulled a gun from his pocket and fired at my dad. Dear God, I have that moment engraved in my memory as if it were in slow motion. I went into total shock and screamed desperately, seeing my dad collapse to the ground bleeding. At that instant, Tyler managed to get into the pickup and fled at high speed. The neighbors heard the gunshot and came out of their houses to see what had happened. They helped put my dad in the ambulance and took him to the hospital. I called the police, trembling with fear, and reported all the facts. Within a few days, the authorities arrested Tyler, and my dad remained hospitalized for several days, but fortunately, nothing serious happened. The bullet went through his shoulder, but luckily, it didn't hit vital organs. Otherwise, the outcome would have been tragic. My entire family blamed me intensely for committing this recklessness, for trusting this platform. My stepmother broke off any kind of relationship with me, taking my dad back to California. They forbade me from maintaining contact with him, and even said it would have been preferable if Tyler had shot me instead of my dad. I recognize that I made serious mistakes by trusting this type of activity, using such a risky platform to make money. I often feel like giving up on everything, but I also question whether all the responsibility is really mine. I'm still in a difficult process of understanding and accepting everything I experienced. Some days are better than others, but I carry with me the lesson that certain choices can have consequences that go far beyond what we can imagine. I hope my experience can serve as a warning to other people who are considering similar paths, because sometimes the price we pay is much greater than any amount of money we can earn. I hope you enjoyed the first story. If you did, don't forget to leave a like. But if I didn't do my job well, feel free to give it a thumbs down. Either way, drop a comment and let us know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now, let's continue. Today, I live without any social media accounts. It's not laziness or lack of time. The reason is much more serious than that. After what I went through a few months ago, any digital platform gives me chills. I know it might seem excessive, but anyone who lived what I lived would understand perfectly. It all started when I moved to study at university in Portland, Oregon. I soon realized I needed to find a source of income. Even though my parents made an effort to pay for my studies, and I was very grateful for that, I couldn't depend on them forever. I wanted my financial independence to go out, have fun, buy things, and eat at different places. But my allowance didn't cover those extra expenses. I started looking for traditional employment, went to several interviews, but nothing worked out. That's when I thought about trying to make money through the internet. Some friends had commented about the amounts they made on sites like OnlyFans, and I thought it could be an interesting alternative. I had an attractive body and thousands of followers on my other networks, so it would be a matter of creating a profile and starting. However, when it came time to put it into practice, I felt terribly insecure. I have nothing against people who work with that, but I couldn't see myself exposing myself that way. So I researched other options and discovered it was also possible to make money selling feet photos. Several people assured me there was good demand and interesting payments in this area. I decided to try. I invested in a good pedicure, carefully set up my profile, and promoted it on my other social networks. But reality was very different from what I expected. For an entire week, I barely managed to make some miserable change. Even so, I didn't get completely discouraged. There was competition, and at least I didn't have to undress, so I considered it was worth the attempt. Something was better than nothing. I was taking it easy, without great expectations, until one day I received an amount that left me surprised. I couldn't believe it when I saw the notification showing someone had given me a tip of $50, more than I had earned in that entire period combined. I immediately sent a message thanking him. "Wow, thank you so much for the gift. What generosity." He responded quickly, "I'm the one who should be thanking you." Right after that, he asked, "Do you take exclusive photos? I want one just for me." I confess I hesitated a little. I didn't think it was wrong, but I felt somewhat uncomfortable with the proposal. After thinking about it, I concluded it was normal in this type of work. I accepted and sent some exclusive photos for a very interesting amount, which excited me a lot. I felt like I was finally managing to prosper in this area. But soon things began to change drastically. Every day this user contacted me at the same time asking for new exclusive photos. His comments were becoming increasingly strange and intense. I tried to ignore it, but it was impossible not to notice how he was becoming obsessive and disturbing. He even sent me photos of himself reacting to my feet images, which was extremely embarrassing, but I tried to stay calm. After all, that's what I was there for, right? But everything fell apart when he wrote something terrifying. "I would really like to meet you in person." At that moment, I felt very scared. I responded directly, "I don't do meetings, sorry. But I pay very well," he insisted. "It doesn't need to be anything beyond your feet. I guarantee you that." The situation was getting very heavy. I repeated that I wasn't interested in that type of program, but he wouldn't give up. He kept insisting nonstop, offering exaggerated amounts, but that was completely out of the question for me. I would never do such a thing. "I won't accept it at all. Please stop insisting," I said very clearly. But then he wrote something that completely chilled me. "I need you. I need to have your feet in real life." I panicked completely. I had no idea what was going through his head, but I was terrified. I wrote asking him to stop with that, but he completely ignored me. The stubborn insistence was making me very nervous, and suddenly I saw a message that said, "That's okay. Either way, they're going to be mine in June." When I read that, I almost dropped my phone. My heart raced, and I froze completely. I realized this person must be someone who followed me and probably knew information about me, like what university I studied at. My mind could only imagine the worst possibilities. Overcome by terror, I decided to delete my OnlyFans profile and erase everything related to it from my social networks. Initially, I felt more relieved. But soon after, I discovered that the photos he had bought began appearing being sent to all my accounts by fake profiles. It was obvious he had created these accounts specifically to stalk me, because they were all created at that moment just to torment me. I blocked them all, but that didn't calm me down at all. On the contrary, I became completely paranoid. I couldn't trust anyone anymore, not my friends, not anyone on campus. What if one of them was this maniac? What if he found me? My mind wouldn't stop thinking about these possibilities, and I couldn't forget that last phrase of his, "They're going to be mine." I imagine he was only talking about my feet, but even so, it tormented me constantly. The weeks passed, and my friends were increasingly worried about me. They said it wasn't good to be locked in the dorm all the time, that I needed to go out a little to distract myself. Despite all the terror, one night I decided to accept going out with them for the first time in a long while. I managed to relax, and to my surprise, I even had a really good time. But because of my distrust, when they asked if they could accompany me to my room, I refused, saying I preferred to go alone. As I explained, I was suspicious of everyone, and that was terrible because I knew someone was watching me, but I couldn't identify who it was. So anyone could be the aggressor. The building wasn't far away, and I had bought pepper spray to protect myself, so I walked. As soon as I entered the building, barely past the main door, something hit my head and I lost consciousness. When I regained my senses, everything was blurry, and I thought it was because of the blow. But when my vision cleared, I saw a man in front of me with his face covered by a hood. "Never seen you in my life," he said with a voice that chilled me. Beautiful sleeping rope. I was on my stomach and could barely move. That's when I realized he had tied my arms and legs with ropes that were attached to the corners of the bed. My breathing failed when I understood what was happening. He covered my mouth with tape so I couldn't scream and began to say things I don't even want to remember. It was too horrible. He looked at me with evil in his eyes and kept repeating that I was his and that he had kept his promise. My feet were going to be his alone. At that moment, I was very confused and terrified. I thought maybe I knew who it was because the voice seemed familiar, but I couldn't remember from where. I could only shake my head and hope someone would help me. He started talking about cutting off my feet and taking them away, and in the midst of despair, I noticed something important. That night was an absolute nightmare. I won't tell in detail what happened and all the horrible things he did to me. I'll just say this man was much more disturbed than I could imagine, and all I could do was pray for someone to rescue me. With all the strength I had, I started struggling, desperately trying to free myself from those ties, but it seemed impossible. I don't know how much time passed. I only know that when I thought the situation couldn't get worse, he showed me something that left me in total shock, a small saw. This sick person was smiling from ear to ear, and didn't even need to say anything for me to understand what he intended to do with that. That's when it became hell. He started making cuts behind my heels very slowly, as if he wanted to prolong my suffering. The pain was terrible, almost unbearable. I started moving and writhing on the bed, desperately trying to free myself from the ropes, even though it seemed impossible from struggling so much. One of the knots on my wrist loosened. With my free hand, I quickly ripped off the tape from my mouth and started screaming for help with all the strength I had. My screams echoed throughout the place, and he couldn't do anything to silence me. When he realized he was discovered, He dropped the saw and tried to flee, but the other residents had already come out of their rooms, and before he could escape, they knocked him to the ground. When they saw the state I was in, everyone was horrified and ran to untie me. Because of the deep cuts he made in my tendons, I couldn't stand up alone, but I was grateful to be alive. The police arrived quickly and arrested the aggressor while they took me to the hospital. Thank God I managed to save my feet, but the truth is I was never the same person again. That night, my life changed forever. The psychopath who attacked me was another student from the college. That's why his voice seemed familiar. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison, and even though that gave me some relief, I never felt safe again. Today, months later, I still fight against the psychological aftermath of that trauma. I deleted all social media, abandoned university, and returned to my parents' house. I frequently wake up with nightmares, and any strange noise leaves me in panic. I know I'll need a lot of time and therapy to be able to rebuild my life. Some scars are visible on my feet, but the worst ones are those that nobody can see. You've probably heard that sometimes we ask for something and end up regretting it later, right? Well, I discovered that in the worst possible way. My name doesn't matter, but I can tell you I've been married to Kelly for almost 5 years. We met at work in Denver, Colorado, and right away there was that chemistry, you know when it's going to work out. We started dating, and soon we were together for real. I'm a few years older than her, and when I got an important promotion, we ended up having to move to another city. The problem was that Kelly had to quit her job to come with me. That really hurt my heart. She loved working and was growing in her career too. I felt terrible that she had to give up everything because of me. Our relationship got a bit tense because she had always been independent, and suddenly she was depending only on me. She tried to manage in the new city, looked for work and ran around, but nothing worked out. Even though I was earning well and could support the household, I could see that the frustration of not having her freedom was destroying her. I didn't want to force the issue because if it were me in her place, I'd feel pressured too. That's why I never insisted for her to accept any job or do something she didn't want. But she spent a lot of time alone at home, and that started to bother me. It was Sunday afternoon, and I was on the porch smoking when I heard Kelly talking on the phone with Anna, a friend of hers. I could only catch pieces of the conversation, but they were having that talk of, do you think we can really do this? Do you think it's a good idea? What if it goes wrong? I got curious. Anna was talking about some sites where women can make money without needing a normal job. Kelly, who didn't know much about these things, seemed confused and somewhat awkward, but interested. Before I could ask anything more, she hung up, and being curious as I am, I couldn't stand it and asked what they were talking about. Then she told me that Anna had an account on a site called OnlyFans. This was a few years ago when this whole thing was just starting, so the site wasn't famous like today, and I had never heard of it. My face must have been quite a picture with that expression of, what the hell is this? That's when she began to explain that on this site, girls make money from followers by sending photos and doing shows. The thing is, guys not only paid to see the content, but sometimes asked for specific things, private photos sent by phone or computer. I was shocked, I asked, and they only pay for photos. And she answered, no, it's not just that. You have to do what they want if you want to earn more money, flirt, send intimate photos, those things. Like a paper service thing. I was surprised when I learned that Anna was making around $300 a day with this hustle, without much effort. But she assured me she wasn't thinking about joining OnlyFans. That's when an idea came out of nowhere in my head, and I said, "Why not?" She looked at me with a completely surprised expression. "Seriously? You want your wife to send intimate photos and sexual content to other guys?" she said, raising her eyebrow. "Of course not, but why not create an account with photos of another girl, using some photo from the internet, and make some dollars without anyone knowing it wasn't really her?" I explained it could be a way to fool the suckers who only wanted virtual sex. The idea was for her to make money, and no one would know it was all fake. That night she thought about it, but after reflecting a lot, she ended up agreeing. So we started working on it. I myself created her account, put a photo of a girl in a bikini from behind, and uploaded a few more we chose from Google, but being careful that the physical characteristics matched. To our surprise, the thing worked better than we expected. In just 3 weeks, the account already had more than 2,000 followers, and we started chatting with them, responding to messages and everything. We laughed at the craziest requests they sent, and had guys willing to pay anything to see nude content. But of course, that wasn't going to last forever. On a Tuesday night, while I was on the couch watching football, I heard Kelly say, "My God, what a sick person." I looked back to where she was messing with the laptop and saw she was pale with a horrified expression. When I asked what was going on, she showed me the OnlyFans account and said a guy was sending photos of his hairy chest, showing part of his private parts, and saying horrible, dirty things. Right away, I took a look at the screen to see better. Interesting, maybe he wants you to say some spicy things and send something more. To my surprise, the guy asked her to send very explicit photos of private parts in a very specific way. Kelly widened her eyes in horror, but I found it funny and jokingly said she could download some photo from Google and ask for $150. To our amazement, the guy accepted and paid $150. Kelly and I high-fived in celebration. We had made $150 for a photo we got for free from the internet. What business better than this? Up to that point, it seemed like the guy would pay and disappear, but it wasn't quite like that. Within seconds, he sent back the photo we had sent him. The guy who called himself White Wolf 69 started writing things like, "This isn't you. I want to see the real you. Don't try to fool me, dear. I don't like being deceived. I'm serious. Make me happy." This left us somewhat confused, but I responded, "What are you talking about, love? This is me." But what the man wrote next left us speechless. "Let me talk to your wife. She's the one I want to talk to, not you." We were shocked, but before we could do anything, the screen started having problems. And suddenly, the webcam turned on by itself, and a video call connected us to something we would never imagine. On the screen appeared an old man of about 60 years old, but dressed like a little girl with fake braids. He was wearing a pink dress and ugly, exaggerated makeup. The guy smiled at us in a frightening way and said, "You can't fool me. I'm the hunter here. This is my game." My blood ran cold. The guy looked like a very sick psychopath. I tried to close the video call several times, but it wouldn't close, and my computer didn't respond to any command. That's when we realized he had invaded our system. The feeling of helplessness was total. I told the guy we'd return his money and asked him to leave us alone. But the old man started saying we didn't understand anything, that we couldn't get rid of him because he was the one who had chosen Kelly. "How do you know who I am? What is all this?" Kelly asked in complete shock. Suddenly, the guy stepped away from the camera, and a tied-up woman appeared behind him. It was Isabella, Kelly's friend. He pushed the chair and put her in front of the camera. Isabella was with her feet and hands tied, mouth covered with tape, and it looked like he was going to do something terrible. I wanted to run to call the police, but when I tried to move, he warned me not to do it or Isabella would pay the price. So I had no choice but to stay there. Suddenly we heard a click followed by a buzzing sound. Isabella, who seemed desperate with her face full of tears, looked at us asking for help, while the man showed what he had in his hand. It was a hair clipper. Then, with that same frozen smile on his face, he began to shave Isabella's head slowly, while she could only cry since her mouth was taped. While cutting her hair, the man began to hum a song. It seemed like a lullaby or something like that. The situation was completely insane and terrifying. At one point, I couldn't stand it anymore and grabbed my phone to call the police. But at that moment, the guy screamed that if we called the police, he would cut Isabella's throat in front of us. So I had to hang up and stay there without being able to move, not knowing what to do. After he finished cutting her hair, he ran the clipper over her eyebrows and eyelashes, leaving her completely bald. Isabella was brunette and had beautiful curly hair with light tips that was her trademark. She adored her hair, and both Kelly and I were devastated seeing what was happening, although our real fear was that he wanted to hurt her in other ways. However, after doing this, the old man simply said goodbye, saying he had finished his game with us, and that now he was going to play with his doll. He said not to worry because he would release her when he got tired of her. Suddenly he approached, grabbed the camera, and kissed it, saying Kelly's name, saying he would see her soon, as if he were kissing my wife, something that made my blood boil. But before I could speak, the screen went black. After that, Kelly and I were silent, hearts racing, unable to believe what had just happened. I called the police, of course, but the truth is they had no clue. They only managed to discover that Isabella was last seen at the supermarket doing normal shopping, and then disappeared without a trace. 2 days passed without news of her. Kelly was terrified and shaken, thinking something terrible had happened to Isabella. I wanted to comfort her and say everything was okay, but I was as worried as she was. During those days, I slept with a gun under the bed, ready to use it if that sick person showed up at my house. A week later at night, just when I thought this couldn't get worse, we heard a loud knock on the door. Kelly and I jumped out of bed, and of course, that maniac's face was the first thing that came to my mind. I went downstairs with the gun in my hand, and she also came down with a knife. I asked who it was, but there was no response. So I held the gun firmly and opened the door slowly. But what I saw on the other side is an image that still haunts me. It was Isabella. She was on the ground, dizzy and lost. Her condition was shocking. She had bruises and wounds all over her body, and her clothes were torn and dirty with blood. We quickly lifted her up and called the police, who arrived within minutes. They interrogated Isabella, and she told them she had been hit from behind when she was putting groceries in her car. The next thing she remembered was being in a dirty room tied to a chair. The most frightening thing of all is that she can't properly remember what happened during the days she was missing. It seems the man gave her some drug, so she only remembers blurry and confused images. Seeing her condition, I couldn't help but think that maybe it was better that way. This psychopath still hasn't been caught, but I hope from the bottom of my heart that he will be soon, because if not, who knows what else might happen. This experience taught me that some doors should never be opened. What started as a simple idea to make some change turned into the worst nightmare of our lives. Now, I understand that when we mess with things we don't know, we can wake up monsters that were sleeping. I immediately deleted the fake profile, and Kelly and I moved to another neighborhood, hoping that demon never crosses our path again. Everyone wants to know what the secret is to getting many followers on social media. People are always asking how to achieve the same success I have online. Before, I thought it was just luck, that I was born at the right time for this. Nowadays, I know that having internet fame, especially being a woman, can become a nightmare you never imagined could happen. Receiving disgusting comments and obscene messages became routine in my life. I've lost count of how many men sent me indecent proposals or asked for intimate photos. I would never do that kind of thing on normal networks. But I confess, I liked posting some more sensual photos on my profile just to see people's reactions. That's how I learned about OnlyFans and realized how much money I could make with it. I didn't think twice before creating my account. The first months were incredible. My profile exploded quickly and became a huge success. I was impressed with how much money I could make doing something that entertained me. Most of my subscribers were respectful and discreet, different from those annoying boys who had no money to pay for content and only sent silly messages. But there was a special client who always bought everything I posted. His name was Carlos, and at first he seemed to be an educated person. He always thanked me and treated me very well. Everything changed the day I decided to publish on my feed a photo I had sent only to him weeks before. When I opened my inbox, I found a message from him. Initially, he was polite, just questioning why I was sharing those images publicly. I explained they were my photos, and I had complete freedom to post them wherever I wanted. But he got furious and rudely demanded that I not use photos that belonged to him. I responded irritated that I could publish whatever I wanted on my own profile. However, Carlos didn't accept it. He wrote to me, "I'm your client and I paid dearly for those photos, so I consider it disrespectful for you to make them available for free or allow others to see them without paying. You only care about money, but these things have value and shouldn't be free." At that moment I was annoyed, but also recognized he had some point. Even so, I responded that he shouldn't interfere, and that if he didn't like my content, he should just cancel his subscription. Carlos didn't give up. He responded saying he knew exactly how much he had spent on me, and that if I decided to distribute the material for free, he would demand a complete refund. I told him to mind his own business and immediately blocked him. It was a relief to be able to block him and solve that problem. One of the advantages of working online is being able to eliminate inconvenient people with just one click. Even though I thought everything was over, the situation was just beginning. I tried to follow my routine normally, took a relaxing bath to forget that unpleasant episode, and then prepared to study algebra since I had an important test the following week. However, when I turned on the computer, I saw that notifications wouldn't stop appearing on the screen. Dozens of messages were arriving from different profiles, all containing the same thing: the word ungrateful, followed by my real name and my home address. I panicked completely. I started crying uncontrollably while blocking all those accounts and deleting the messages, but they kept appearing nonstop. I couldn't understand what was happening until I received a video call on Skype. I hesitated before answering, but decided to accept, keeping my camera off as a precaution. That's when I became completely terrified. Carlos's familiar voice echoed through the speakers. "Still think you were smart blocking me, girl." His tone was threatening and full of rage, but he kept his own webcam turned off. I couldn't comprehend how he had discovered my address and started screaming, asking what that meant. Carlos began attacking me verbally, saying I had been ungrateful and dishonest by blocking him. "Do you know how much I spent on you? If you intend to distribute those photos for free now, then give me back every cent. I want my money back immediately, and stop pretending you don't understand anything. I've already shared your personal information with other clients who really paid for your content." I kept trembling and crying, but tried to stay calm to respond that I didn't understand what was wrong with him, and that this persecution needed to stop. The situation became even more terrible when Carlos started humiliating me, saying I was nothing but trash, that I could talk to anyone I wanted, and that blocking him had been a mistake that would bring serious consequences. The most terrifying moment was when he turned on the webcam again, but instead of showing his face, the image that appeared made my blood run cold instantly. It was my house. My heart raced and I felt paralyzing terror. Seeing my own residence through that maniac's camera was something that left me without reaction. Carlos, with his cold and calculating voice, whispered, "You shouldn't have blocked me." I immediately felt nauseous and dizzy, as if someone had hit me in the head, and unbearable pain took over me. My breathing became gasping and irregular. In the midst of desperation, I called the police while watching that man standing on the sidewalk in front of my house. I made the call as quickly as possible, and while waiting for the police to arrive, I tried to record everything he was doing with my cell phone in case he tried to flee. When I pointed the phone's camera at the window, he had already disappeared. Instead of Carlos, I saw my mother approaching the front door carrying some shopping bags. Desperate, I started screaming, "Mom, go back to the car. There's a dangerous man out here. Call someone to help." She couldn't understand my screams in time. At that exact moment, Carlos came out from behind a tree wielding a baseball bat and began attacking my mother with violent blows. I was paralyzed with horror. I felt like my heart was going to explode and started screaming hysterically for him to stop. My mother was screaming for help, while that psychopath continued beating her. I ran toward the front entrance trying to intervene. He persisted in the attack, and I desperately needed someone to help me save her. I threw myself at Carlos immediately, but he pushed me hard, throwing me away. The pain from the impact was intense, but I got up quickly to try to protect my mother again. My memories of those moments are fragmented and confused, because terror and adrenaline made everything around me hazy. I only remember that Carlos was screaming horrible things, blaming me for everything, and threatening that if I continued selling photos or interacting with other men, the same violence would be directed at me. While I cried, screamed, and fought against him, my mother remained fallen and injured. Every time Carlos tried to go back to her to continue the attacks, I threw myself at him again. Strangely, he didn't use the bat against me. He only pushed me away, as if he knew it caused me more suffering to attack my mother. This fight lasted until brave neighbors came to help us. Realizing he was surrounded, Carlos tried to escape, but at that moment the police arrived and managed to arrest him. My first impulse was to run to my mother, but the officers prevented me from touching her until the ambulance arrived. She was on the ground, conscious but moaning in pain, her whole body trembling and her face covered with blood and bruises. When we got to the hospital, we discovered that besides the superficial injuries, she had suffered more serious complications. The tests revealed a severe skull fracture, and she needed to stay several days in the intensive care unit. Fortunately, the surgery was successful, and my mother recovered completely after a few weeks of treatment. But the story hadn't reached its end yet. Later, I discovered that Carlos was transferred back to a psychiatric hospital. Yes, a psychiatric hospital, because this man suffered from multiple mental disorders and had been admitted by his own family to a specialized clinic from which he managed to escape without anyone noticing. Even though he was hospitalized again, I learned he continued obsessed with me, constantly mentioning my name during crises and episodes at the hospital. Despite having moved to another neighborhood, I didn't completely abandon social media. I just closed my OnlyFans account. Every day when I look out the window, I feel constant fear that this disturbed person might have escaped again and is watching me from somewhere. The terror I feel is real and permanent because I know that at any moment he could return to punish me for something that should never have happened. I'll never forget the exact moment my life turned upside down. It happened a few years ago, but I can still feel every detail as if it were today. The sun was shining brightly that common day in California. Nothing indicated that something was going to change. My name is Sarah, and at that time I led a very simple life without great emotions. I lived in the same routine as always, without much interesting happening. I worked as a model for OnlyFans, a choice that sometimes brought me heavy criticism, but also many fans who helped me express myself and connect with people in ways I never imagined. In the comfort of my room, I could show my sensual side and do things I never thought of. And the best part was that I made money from it. At first it was scary, yes, but as I gained confidence, all these barriers and prejudices I had disappeared, and I ended up falling in love with this work, so to speak. But everything changed when I received a request from a follower who, without knowing it, was going to turn my entire reality upside down. The message was different, but quite interesting. The follower wanted me to pretend to pose like in ancient paintings, but with very sensual clothes and leaving little to the imagination. The guy who called himself the artist offered an enormous amount for this work. The truth is I had received quite different requests before, so I didn't stop to think much and accepted. The first pose was from a painting I recognized immediately. It was Botticelli's Birth of Venus. I had studied art in college, so positioning myself to imitate the goddess of love seemed a bit uncomfortable to me. But it was part of the job, so I continued with the requests. The curious thing was that as I progressed, the paintings became increasingly darker and more disturbing. We went from Venus to more macabre and frightening works, like Edward Munch's Salome with the head of John the Baptist and Caravaggio's head of Medusa. But what was different wasn't just that. It was that every time I did one of these poses, my apartment began to give me chills, and shortly after, some strange things started to happen. On one occasion, I had behind me a vase with flowers that I had placed in that same position in one of the photos, and suddenly it flew through the air and broke against the wall. I was left without reaction, and precisely at that moment I began to hear low whispers, almost like leaves being blown by the wind. I remained motionless, but then the whispers became louder, being heard clearly. But the language they spoke was impossible for me to understand. There was something in them that got into my bones. The nightmares also began to become more frequent. I always dreamed of a dark-skinned woman twisted in an unnatural position, with her arms stretched and her body curved in an inhuman way. She hummed a sad lament mixed with moans like a dying whale. And then she would start crying blood from her dark eyes. Sometimes I woke up sweating, heart racing, and breathing like crazy, not understanding at all what was really happening. The only thing I knew was that this feeling of something sinister lurking in my apartment wouldn't leave me. Until one night I had a revelation. While I was preparing for another session, suddenly everything seemed to make sense. All the paintings, the poses, the representations I made seemed to be parts of a very macabre puzzle. I felt like I was involved in something more dangerous than it seemed. I felt I had made a big mistake by getting into this, but the moment doubt appeared in my mind, out of nowhere he offered more money, almost impossible quantities. In fact, I won't say exactly how much, but we're talking about thousands of dollars. It was total madness, as if the guy behind everything could read my mind just by seeing my face. I was trapped and didn't want to leave, or didn't know how. I tried to search the internet for something about this painter, about this guy, something that would give me an answer to what was happening. But I only found an old urban legend about a solitary artist who was rejected for his macabre and bloody work. They say he became addicted to the occult and believed he could make deals with diabolical entities to find eternal life through his paintings. Rumors said the man made a deal with dark forces and disappeared when he got what he wanted. They said his works were a representation of death itself. The story was really terrifying, and for a moment it seemed like it was just fiction. But I couldn't deny that something inside me told me this could be an answer to everything that was happening to me. That maybe I wasn't just posing for an artist, but performing rituals that called these demons or spirits into my own home. The last request came on a night when the air in my apartment was very heavy, as if something sinister was in the environment. It's a sensation I can't explain, but it seemed like the air became thick, as if it had weight. By this point, I had accumulated the absurd amount of $25,000, a quantity my family had never seen, and that clearly seemed too good to be true and enough for me to retire. But when I was decided to leave this client, once again, as if he had read my mind, he offered me a ridiculous amount of money for one last representation. $50,000. I stared wide-eyed, unable to believe what he was offering, and once again I couldn't resist. However, this last request was more frightening than all the previous ones. He wanted me to recreate a painting I could never find anywhere. A dark-skinned woman, naked, twisted in a horrible pose with eyes that seemed to cry blood. But her face had a disturbing expression, one that was between pleasure and terrible suffering. The image itself was shocking, but not just because of how macabre it was. It was because there was something in it that seemed almost real, almost as if it had life. And what's worse, I couldn't avoid noticing the resemblance of this figure to the one that appeared in my nightmares. However, as stupid as it may seem, I didn't refuse the offer. The idea of earning those 50,000 so easily had blinded me. When I prepared to do this pose, something in me trembled. It was as if a deep fear entered my bones, as if in the deepest part of my being something was screaming at me not to do it. As I took off my clothes, the whispers in the house increased until they became an unbearable noise, and the shadows on the walls seemed to move by themselves, taking shapes that looked human. My stomach tightened hard, and no matter how much I tried to convince myself it was just my paranoid imagination deceiving me, I knew it wasn't like that. At this point, I realized something terrible. I wasn't alone in my apartment. It wasn't just my work. I had been surrounded by presences all this time, since the first photo I posted. The horror in this final scene was total. I was in the middle of these shadows that seemed to dance, and I had the strange certainty that this last pose wasn't just another drawing, but the key to opening some door, to closing a circle of something I didn't understand. All the hair on my skin was standing up, but for some reason I didn't stop. It was already done, so I should continue and let whatever had to happen happen. The money was already in my account, so there I was naked, with my body full of chills and my hand trembling, while I adjusted my camera to capture this pose. My head was full of all this fear and these doubts, but I was determined to complete the task. When I put myself in this twisted position, imitating the agony of this woman in the painting, the whole place seemed to breathe. My body filled with a sensation that wasn't mine. It was like a kind of possession. I don't know. I began to feel a deep pain, but not physical. It was from the soul. At the same time, a sensation of pleasure that seemed incompatible with the previous one, as if two forces were fighting inside me. My face contorted into that same disturbing expression of the figure alone, and my eyes began to cry without me being able to avoid it. But the most frightening was yet to happen. When the camera clicked, the shadows that were dancing threw themselves in my direction with brutal force, covering me in total darkness. At that moment, I lived the most terrifying sensation of my entire life. It was as if all that darkness was crushing me, to the point of taking away my breath completely. Desperation invaded me when I saw I couldn't breathe. I kicked and moved but couldn't do anything. The shadows had me trapped, and I thought the end had come, that this would be my last breath in this place. But no, just when I was about to faint, the shadows suddenly receded, the whispers disappeared, and everything fell into a silence that filled everything, so deep I could even feel it in my ears. The only thing I could hear was my heavy breathing, struggling to recover oxygen. At that moment, I knew that for the first time in days, I was really alone. Since this painter entered my life, I had never felt like this. When I managed to get up, the first thing I did was run desperately to my computer. But this guy, the so-called painter, had disappeared as if he had never existed. The only thing left in my hands was a different message and a money transfer. The $50,000, as if nothing had happened, as if it were a simple payment like any other. But the truth was it wasn't like that. Something inside me was broken or was no longer there. I could feel this kind of hole inside me, as if something was missing from me, and it's a sensation that accompanies me to this day without me being able to avoid it. The following days seemed to return to normal, more or less. In my heart, I knew this peace was only temporary. Something told me that, until a few months later, someone knocked on my door. I opened carefully because I wasn't expecting visits, but there was no one, just a small box at my feet. I took it to the kitchen with my heart racing, and when I opened it, I found a note. "Thank you," just that. And what was inside? A photo. An image that completely destroyed me. It was my last pose, that same twisted position that imitated the painting they had asked me for in the last moment. But I wasn't alone in it. Behind me was a woman with dark skin, naked, with eyes crying blood. It wasn't just a simple photograph. It was a portrait, yes, but it was also proof that this entity, this spirit that had been behind me, had managed to escape from that prison of canvases and had manifested in the real world. Today I understand I was just a tool, a means for something terrible to manifest. That money that seduced me so much was the price of my own soul. And now I live with the certainty that a part of me stayed forever trapped in those shadows. The worst of all is knowing that somewhere this entity continues free, looking for its next victim. And I was responsible for freeing this evil into the world. Good evening, everyone. My name is Alana, and it's been 6 years since Marcus left us. But there are still nights when his absence feels like something physical, a hollow space on the right side of our bed. You get used to the pain, to missing him, but never to the empty space that remains. He died in such a senseless, violent way, a robbery during a business trip to Phoenix. What I was left with was a house in suburban Denver, a 6-year-old son named Leo, and a baby girl barely 3 weeks old. Back then, I functioned on autopilot. My days were a fog of bottles, diapers, and trying to explain to Leo why Daddy wasn't coming home anymore. And little Sarah, my newborn, slept in the bassinet right next to my bed. Poor Leo would come at midnight and squeeze between us. I didn't have the strength to tell him no. The truth is, the warmth of his little body helped chase away some of that cold that had nothing to do with Colorado's winter. The house that had always been our refuge had become a strange place. The silence was the hardest part. It wasn't a peaceful silence. It was heavy, filling the rooms where his voice used to be, the music he'd play, the sound of the TV with the evening news. I moved carefully, trying not to make noise, not to wake the children. And I'd end up drowning in that stillness that only reminded me of what I'd lost. I was in my recovery period from the C-section, my body still aching and my head a complete mess. My sister Maria would come almost every day to help, but when night fell, I was alone. Just me and that silence that seemed to be waiting for something. I found myself paying attention to every creak of the wooden floors, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant bark of a neighbor's dog. Any sound was a relief, because the worst part was when there was absolutely nothing to hear. That's when his absence screamed the loudest. It was on one of those nights. I think about 3 weeks after the funeral. I had just gotten Sarah back to sleep and was sinking into bed in that state where you don't know if you're already dreaming or still awake. That's when I heard it, far away on the street, the sound of his car's engine. It was unmistakable. Marcus never took good care of the car, and the engine had this rough sound, sputtering a bit before settling into its rhythm. My first thought in that fog of exhaustion was immense relief. Thank God he's home. The phrase formed in my head with complete clarity. I heard the screech of the iron garage gate, the car pulling in slowly, the tires rolling over that puddle of water that always formed there. The engine shut off, the car door slammed, then the sound of keys in the front door lock. Everything in the exact sequence, in the exact timing he always took. His footsteps entered the house, dragging his slippers slightly on the cold tile floor, and then he started whistling. A chill ran through me, raising the hair on my skin. It was a habit of his, whistling softly, some random melody, always the same one, when he came home at night. I stayed lying there with my eyes closed, just listening to that routine that was so familiar to me. The sound of the TV turning on in the living room with the volume low, probably the news or some late-night game. Then the footsteps headed to the kitchen, the refrigerator door opening, the sound of a plate being placed in the microwave, the beeping of the number pad, and finally, the hum of the appliance heating something up. Everything normal, everything exactly as it should be. And that's when, while the microwave hummed in the silent house, reality hit me. It was like taking a punch to the stomach. I woke up completely. Marcus was dead. He wasn't on a trip. He wasn't coming back. None of this could be happening. At that exact moment, the microwave beeped, finishing its cycle, and the footsteps resumed. This time leaving the kitchen and advancing down the hallway toward our bedroom. My body wouldn't obey me. I wanted to scream, wanted to get up and run, but I was pinned to the bed. All I could do was stretch my arm and pull Leo closer, burying his face against my chest. My other hand went to the crib, gripping the edge so tightly my fingers ached. The footsteps stopped right in front of our door. I lay there staring at the doorknob, waiting for it to turn. The entire world had been reduced to that closed door and whatever was on the other side. One thought repeated endlessly in my head, a silent plea. Please don't open it. Don't let me see. I won't be able to handle it if I see you. Time stopped. I don't know how long it lasted, seconds, minutes, and suddenly everything stopped. The silence returned, but now it was a different silence, an absolute silence, thick, as if whatever was out there had simply vanished into thin air. I spent the rest of the night awake, staring at the door, holding my children until dawn broke. A few days passed. I tried to convince myself it had been a nightmare, a hallucination caused by extreme exhaustion. You lie to yourself to keep functioning. I had 2 children who depended on me. I couldn't afford to fall apart or believe in ghosts. The heavy routine even helped push the episode into a dark corner of my mind. But reality always finds a way to slap you. One afternoon, the house phone rang. I answered with Sarah in my arms, rocking her gently so she wouldn't cry. It was Derek, my brother-in-law, Marcus's older brother. His voice was always somewhat formal, distant. He started with the usual questions about how I was, how the kids were. I answered what was expected. We were managing, one day at a time. There was a pause, and I already knew what was coming. Alana, he began with that tone of someone about to deliver bad news. I know the timing is terrible, really, but we need to start looking at Marcus's papers. I felt a knot in my stomach. Papers, Derek. I don't have the headspace for that right now. I understand, really, he insisted without understanding anything. But things can't just stay in limbo. There's the estate, the house documents, his accounts. It's a tedious, bureaucratic process. The sooner we start, the better. It's for everyone's good, especially the kids. A few days later, he showed up at the house with a lawyer, stacking documents on the dining room table. That phrase, "for the kids' good," sounded like a veiled threat. He wasn't worried about me or my children's future. He was worried about his share. Marcus had a small business, and the house we lived in was in his name. Suddenly, the memory of that night, of the footsteps in the hallway, came back with full force. But it mixed with a different fear, a more concrete one. After I hung up, I stood in the middle of the living room for a good while. The fear of what I heard in the darkness was one thing, it left you breathless. But the fear that Derek's voice caused me was another. It was a fear that came with paperwork, with lawyers, with the real possibility of losing our home. And doubt settled in once and for all. Was my head really playing tricks on me? With all this pressure, with grief, with sleepless nights, maybe I had created those sounds myself. Maybe the ghost wasn't Marcus, but my own desperation taking shape. My sister Maria, noticing my state, began spending more time at the house. She'd arrive in the morning, help me with the kids, with cooking, and wouldn't leave until late afternoon. Her presence was a relief. Adult conversation, practical help. A reminder that I wasn't completely alone in the world. On one of those afternoons, the house was finally quiet. Sarah was sleeping in her crib, and Leo, exhausted from running around, had fallen asleep on the living room couch. I was sitting in an armchair, folding a pile of baby clothes that never seemed to end. Maria was in the kitchen, washing the lunch dishes. The kitchen window looks directly onto our backyard, which has a large oak tree right in the middle. I was distracted, almost dozing, when I noticed that the sound of water in the sink had stopped. A sudden silence. It struck me as strange. I looked up and saw my sister standing completely still, staring fixedly outside. Her hand still held a sponge, suspended in the air. "Maria," I called softly, "everything okay?" She didn't answer immediately. She just kept looking at the yard. Her face, which I could see in profile, was pale. She swallowed hard and only then turned toward me with wide eyes. "Alana," her voice came out as a whisper. "Marcus was out there." I felt my stomach turn. I jumped up, knocking the pile of clothes to the floor. "What are you saying, Maria?" "I saw him," she said, approaching and grabbing my arm. Her hand was ice cold. "I swear to God, Alana. He came out from behind the oak tree, wearing that plaid shirt he always wore, and a cold wind came out of nowhere across the hot yard. He bent down, picked up some fallen branches, and then went into the storage shed." The storage shed was a small building at the back of our property. We hardly ever used it. We stood looking at each other for a moment, fear passing from one to the other. Without saying more, we went together to the back door. We opened it and stepped into the yard. The afternoon air was hot and still. We walked slowly, side by side, across the dry grass to the storage shed door. It was closed, as always. With a trembling hand, I turned the handle and pushed. It was empty, just the old washing machine covered with a plastic sheet, and some of Marcus's old tools leaning against the wall. No one was there. We went back inside and sat at the kitchen table in silence. The doubt that had been tormenting me was gone. It wasn't my head, it wasn't stress, it wasn't a hallucination. Maria had seen him. He was really there somehow, and that certainty was 1,000 times more terrifying than any doubt. After what Maria saw, the fear in the house changed color. It was no longer a suspicion, it was a fact. We didn't talk much about it, but the air became heavier, as if we were both trapped in a waiting room, anticipating the next manifestation. Every sound in the house, every shadow in the corner of our eyes was a trigger. The confirmation that it wasn't just in my head somehow made everything worse. The next time didn't take long and came from further away. It was in the early hours of a Tuesday. The phone rang around 4 in the morning. A call at that hour is never good news. My heart was already racing even before I answered. I saw the name on the screen, Aunt Helen. She was my mother's sister, an aunt that Marcus adored. I answered, already expecting the worst. "Hello, Aunt Helen." From the other side of the line, I only heard low, broken sobbing. "Aunt Helen, what happened? Did something happen?" I asked, sitting up in bed. "Alana, sweetheart." Her voice was shaky, almost unrecognizable. "It was him, Alana. It was Marcus." I felt the room spinning. "What? How, Aunt Helen? Where?" "Here at my front door," she sobbed. I heard a car stop in the street. It seemed strange to me. I went to the kitchen for a glass of water and heard his voice calling me from the gate. So clear, sweetheart, it was his voice. I went mute, just gripping the phone tightly. She continued, repeating the words as if to convince herself that she had really heard them. He said, "Helen, open up, please." He said my name. "Let me in, it's very important." And he kept asking. He sounded so distressed. "Open up, please, Helen, let me in." My aunt told me she stayed crouched on the kitchen floor, without the courage to even peek through the window. She was only able to call me now, when the day began to break. I hung up the phone and sat in the darkness. The fear now was different. It was no longer his silent, routine presence inside our house. It was an echo, a desperate plea that was spreading. He was trying to speak, trying to reach us, and the question that froze me inside was simple. What was so important that it made him knock on the doors of the living from beyond? The battle over the papers became a series of tense meetings with Derek's lawyer. I didn't have money for a good attorney, and honestly, I didn't have the strength to fight. Derek and his family had everything in their favor. A few weeks later, I was packing my life into boxes. Every object I picked up was a memory. The photos on the bookshelf, his coffee mug that I still hadn't had the courage to put away, Leo's toys scattered on the floor. Packing the children's room was the hardest part. Maria helped me in silence, knowing there was nothing that could be said. On the last day, the moving truck had already taken almost everything. I was doing a final walkthrough of the empty house, the echo of my footsteps keeping me company. I entered our bedroom, now a bare room with furniture marks on the walls. I went to Sarah's crib, which would be the last thing to be disassembled. And then I saw it. On the empty crib mattress, right in the center, was his wedding ring, resting on a folded piece of paper with the initials MS. I stopped. All the blood drained from my feet. It wasn't possible. I had put his ring away myself in a small velvet box along with his watch and other valuables. The box was at the bottom of a suitcase that was already at my mother's house, where I would be staying temporarily. I was absolutely sure of that. I picked up the ring. It was cold, just a simple gold band worn from use, but in that moment it was everything. I didn't feel fear. For the first time in months, the fear disappeared completely. What came in its place was a wave of sadness so great that I had to lean against the wall to keep from falling. I understood. It wasn't a warning, it wasn't a threat. It was a goodbye, a final gesture, a way of saying that he was there, that he saw my pain, and that it was okay for me to leave. It was him giving me permission to move on. I squeezed the ring in my hand and cried. I cried for everything, for his loss, for the house, for the family we were, for the anger I felt toward his relatives, for the fear I felt in the darkness. I let it all out there in that empty room. When I left the house for the last time, I locked the door and didn't look back. Today, 6 years later, life is different. I live in a small apartment I work, and my children are growing up healthy and happy. Sometimes I think about those months. I'll never have a definitive answer about what happened. Whether it was my grief that created shapes and sounds, whether it was stress, or whether it was really my Marcus trapped between worlds, desperately trying to take care of us in the only way he could. Maybe it was a bit of everything. The truth is, it doesn't matter anymore. What matters is that the love that remained was greater than the fear. And it was that love that gave me the strength to put his ring on a chain that I wear around my neck today and move forward. My name is Luke. I'm writing because I went through something about 2 years ago that I still can't explain properly to this day. And to be honest, I haven't had the courage to tell this to almost anyone. It seems like the kind of thing people listen to, while shaking their heads with that little smile of someone who thinks, "Poor guy, he's lost his mind." But it happened, every part of it, and it started in the most foolish way possible, with my failure. I was 26 years old, living with my parents in Sacramento, and I was in a phase where everything seemed to go wrong. I had lost my job in one of those corporate restructurings and had been distributing resumes for almost 6 months without anything coming up. Nothing at all. It was a horrible feeling of uselessness. I watched my friends' progress, talking about buying a car, getting a loan for an apartment, and there I was, depending on my parents for everything, feeling like a complete zero inside the house. One Sunday, to escape that heavy atmosphere a bit, we went to a farmer's market in nearby Nevada City, a small town famous for its artisan crafts. While my parents looked at some embroidered tablecloths, I wandered off and started walking aimlessly among the stalls. That's when I saw it. At a more secluded stall, squeezed between one selling quesadillas and another with honey jars, an elderly woman with completely white hair was selling some clay pieces, and one of them caught my attention. It was a small, chubby figurine with a pointed hat and a smile that was simultaneously friendly and somewhat mocking. The handwritten wooden sign said, "Guardian of Good Fortune." I, who have never believed in these things, felt a pang of, I don't know what desperation maybe. I thought, what do I have to lose? I went over there. The woman looked at me over her glasses and smiled a toothless smile. "You like it?" she asked with a hoarse voice. I found it interesting. "Does it really work?" I asked, trying to make it sound like a joke. She didn't laugh. She adjusted her glasses and said very seriously, "It works if you do your part. It's not an ornament, It's a new inhabitant for your house." Then she handed me a list of rules, like it was an instruction manual. I had to give it a name, couldn't leave it in the sun, and should offer it from time to time a pinch of black coffee without sugar and a bit of corn flour. And most importantly, treat it like one more member of the family. If someone treated it badly or with disdain, it could become resentful. And a resentful guardian, according to her, was not good company. I bought it, it was cheap. I paid, and while she wrapped the figurine in old newspaper, I felt like an idiot. But I was an idiot with a drop of hope, no matter how ridiculous it was. That day I baptized my piece of clay as Gilbert. I got home and, without my parents seeing, installed Gilbert on a shelf in my room, somewhat hidden behind some books. I felt tremendous shame, but did everything as the woman had indicated. I took a little coffee cup that no one used and put a drop of pure coffee in it. On a small plate, I put a little mound of corn flour from a bag I found in the kitchen pantry. I felt like a complete imbecile talking to the figurine. "Look, Gilbert, here's the situation," I whispered, feeling like a character from a crazy movie. "This is the house. I hope you like it. I just need you to give me a hand and we'll understand each other. Coffee and corn flour won't be lacking." In the following days, nothing happened. Life continued the same. That feeling of having been cheated began to grow. Every morning I looked toward the shelf and thought about the money I could have used to put credit on my phone. But then, on Wednesday, something strange. I was looking for a document in a jacket I hadn't worn in months and found a $50 bill in the pocket. I was absolutely sure I had already checked that jacket before. I stood there staring at the bill. I felt my heart racing. Coincidence, of course, it had to be. But that same day in the afternoon, my phone rang. It was an unknown number. A girl from HR calling me for a first interview. A temporary position, nothing special. But it was the first call in months. When I hung up, my first look was toward the shelf, toward Gilbert. A stupid smile appeared on my face. It's working, I thought. That night during dinner, my mom commented, "What's that smell of old coffee in your room, Luke?" My dad, without taking his eyes off the TV, grumbled, "It must be that weird figurine he bought at the market. I saw it when I went to look for a screwdriver in your room." I felt my face getting hot. "It's just a craft piece, Dad, and it doesn't smell like anything," I responded, perhaps too defensively. The conversation died there, but the discomfort remained. They thought it was nonsense. Little did they know that the weird figurine had already gotten me $50 and an interview. Gradually, the shame turned into a kind of secret, a pact between that clay figure and me. What I didn't know was that this luck was going to cost me dearly, and the change would come with interest. The interview was a disaster. The guy who talked to me barely looked at my face. He seemed more interested in quickly dispatching the matter. I left there with that bitter feeling of wasted time. The luck that Gilbert supposedly brought seemed to vanish in the hot air of that afternoon. The frustration returned with everything, and for a few days, I ignored the figurine on the shelf. I didn't change the coffee, didn't talk to him anymore. If he wanted to bring luck, let him work properly. I know it's childish reasoning, but that's how I felt. The first really strange thing happened on a Monday. My parents had gone out, and I was alone in the house, in the service patio washing some sneakers that were filthy. I was wearing headphones with the music at full volume, concentrated on my task, and even with the noise, I felt it. You know that feeling on the back of your neck when someone is staring at you? It's something almost animal. I turned around abruptly, looking toward the kitchen door that led to the hallway. For a split second, I saw a shadow. It wasn't a projected shadow. It was something dense, low, that ran quickly down the hallway toward the stairs. It was so fast that my brain took time to process it. The first thing I thought was one of the dogs, but then I looked toward the patio, and both were there, lying in the sun, sleeping. Neither of them had entered the house. My room has a window that looks directly onto that area where I was. I felt the impulse to look up, and when I looked, the curtain of my window, which was closed, moved. It was pulled to one side, just a crack, as if someone was spying from inside, and then it returned to its place. The sound of music in my ears disappeared. All I could hear was my own blood pounding. I stood completely still with the brush in my hand, the water from the faucet running. There was no one in the house. No one, and someone had just spied on me through the window of my own room. That's when the voice of that woman from the market came back to my head. If it becomes resentful, it's not good company. And the other rule, if it acts up, you have to scold it like it was a child. I don't know where I got the courage. My legs turned to jelly, but I marched inside. I went up the stairs. Each step was a struggle, and I opened the room door with force. I went straight to the shelf and confronted the figurine. "What's your problem, huh?" I said, my voice coming out more shaky than I wanted. "I asked you not to do this kind of pranks. I asked you not to scare me." I took the plate with the old corn flour and threw it in the trash. I changed the coffee. My hands were shaking a little. "Let's see if you stay quiet." Understood. There was no response. Of course, it was just a clay figurine. But for some reason, after saying that, the atmosphere in the room seemed to lighten a bit. Just a bit. After the scolding, things calmed down for about 2 weeks. I maintained the care routine with Gilbert, but now it was different. It was no longer out of hope, it was out of fear. I said goodbye to him when I left and greeted him when I returned. It was a ritual to keep the peace. Until one day, in my rush not to miss the bus, I forgot. I ran out without saying anything, without looking at the shelf. I spent the whole day away, at a friend's house, trying to forget my life for a few hours. I just didn't imagine that the price of that forgetfulness would come that dawn. It was late. I was already in bed, looking at my phone before sleeping. That's when I heard the dogs downstairs. They started coming up the stairs, a sound of nails on the floor that we didn't like because they had the habit of peeing in the hallway. My dad had scolded them so much for that they didn't even dare go past the 5th step. That's why it seemed strange to me. Suddenly, the loud barking started. And it wasn't their normal barking when they see a cat on the fence. It was desperate, aggressive barking, an ugly growl of a cornered animal. I felt more anger than fear. I thought they weren't going to let me sleep. I was already getting up from bed to go put some order when a different sound cut through the air. It wasn't a scream or a whistle. It was a dry, sharp snap that echoed throughout the house, and at the same instant, the dogs fell completely silent. I heard the sound of their nails going down the stairs again, but slowly, almost dragging, and then a low whine, a whimper of pure fear coming from the patio. Our dogs, 2 large, brave mutts who would make anyone run, were terrified by something inside my house. I stayed sitting on the edge of the bed. My body wouldn't obey me. It wasn't paralysis, it was a refusal. Something inside me screamed not to move. I took a deep breath and lay back down very slowly, covering myself up to my head, facing the wall, turning my back to the door. It was the worst decision I could have made. I started to hear the doorknob of my room turning slowly from side to side. Someone was trying to open it, and then came the laughter. A low, nasal giggle like that of a child who has just played a great prank and is hiding. The sound came from the hallway, right on the other side of the door. I curled up under the blanket and started crying silently, without making noise, while I prayed everything I knew, stumbling over the words. I don't know at what point I fell asleep. I woke up with sunlight coming through the window. I didn't have the courage to tell anything. I already imagined my dad's responses. But that morning, he wasn't home. My mom sat at the kitchen table with me, served coffee, and looked at me in a way I had never seen. That look of someone who has rehearsed a conversation 1,000 times. "Son," she began, her voice low and serious. "I didn't want to believe it, but we can't pretend anymore. If it's because of that figurine you have in your room, please, Luke, get rid of that thing." Before I could ask why, she continued, rushing through the words. "We've been going weeks, your dad and I, without sleeping well. We hear little footsteps running down the hallway all night," giggles. "Your dad wakes up every day with pain in his shoulders, as if he had been carrying something heavy all night. He doesn't tell you anything, you know how he is, but he's exhausted, can barely stay on his feet, and with his high blood pressure, I'm afraid of what this lack of rest could do to him." I listened to that and felt my stomach sink. My mom, the most down-to-earth person I know, admitting that something supernatural was happening. And worse, it was attacking my dad, the skeptic, the one who made fun. Maybe that was exactly why. His lack of respect was attracting all the rage of that thing. The fear I felt became something else. It became guilt. The guilt was a weight I couldn't carry alone. That same day, I called my girlfriend Tanya and told her everything. I let out the whole story, from the market to the conversation with my mom that morning. I expected anything for her to laugh, to send me to a psychologist. But her reaction was one of calm concern that was almost worse. "Luke, look at yourself," she said, holding my face with both hands. "You haven't slept well in weeks. You're overwhelmed with this job thing. Don't you think it could be, your thing? Stress." "Tanya," my mom heard it. "My dad is sick because of this. It's not my thing." I know, but giggles, a figurine. "Honey, that doesn't make sense." We went to my room. I wanted her to see Gilbert. As soon as we entered, I showed her the figurine on the shelf. She looked at it with the face of someone analyzing a strange bug. "It's just a clay figurine, babe." And the moment she finished the sentence, a wooden toy car that was on the same shelf, a toy of mine from when I was a kid that hadn't been touched in years, simply fell. It didn't slip, it was pushed, fell to the floor with a dry thud that made us both jump. We stood in silence. Tanya looked from the car on the floor to the figurine, and her face turned white. She didn't say anything, just took my hand. Her hand was ice cold. 2 days later, she came with a solution. She had talked to her grandmother, who recommended a man who lived in a more remote neighborhood, a man who knew about these energies, according to the grandmother. I had no faith, but I was so desperate that I accepted immediately. His house was simple, a low iron gate, a well-kept patio with a strong smell of herbs and incense. The man who attended us was thin, with white hair and a calm gaze. He had us come in and sit on some old sofas in the living room. Before I could open my mouth to explain, he looked at me intently and said, "You took too long to seek help. The thing that walks with you already feels like it owns the place." Tanya and I looked at each other, scared. She assured me she hadn't told him anything, just asked for an appointment. I told the whole story again without omitting details. He listened to everything in silence, nodding slightly. When I finished, he sighed a heavy, tired sigh. "You brought a freeloader into your house, attached to an object, and worse, you gave it a name, you gave it food, you gave it attention. You fed it. Breaking it or throwing it away will only make things worse. The energy will be released from the object and will stick to you or the house. And then to remove it, the work is 10 times greater." "But what do I do then?" I asked, my voice almost disappearing. "I need to get that out of there." He looked at me seriously in a way that gave me chills. "There are 2 ways out, but both are dangerous. If you make a mistake, the consequences can be serious. The first, you take it to a church, a big church that has more than one door. You go in, leave it on a pew near the altar, and tell it, 'Wait here for me, I'll be right back.' And you leave through the other door without ever looking back. The second," he continued, "is more difficult but more correct. You need to take it to a place in the mountains, in strong nature, a forest, a lake, and there you're going to give it a new function. You're going to tell it that its mission now is to take care of that place, the animals, the trees. But for this to work, everyone who lives in the house must say goodbye to it. They must give it their blessing to leave in peace." The second option seemed impossible. I couldn't imagine my dad, the man who laughed at horror movies, talking to a clay figurine and asking it to leave. I returned home with my head in a mess. The church option seemed easier, but something in the man's seriousness told me that the right path was the most difficult. I called my mom to a corner and explained the situation. I told her about the second option, the one with the forest, and the condition that everyone had to say goodbye. I saw the desperation on her face. How was she going to convince my dad to do something like that? She just said with a tired voice, "Let me talk to him." That night I left my room door ajar and pretended I was asleep. Every noise in the house seemed much louder. After a while, I heard my mom's light steps. She entered, stayed a minute in silence in front of the shelf, and I heard a low, unintelligible whisper. Then the sound of something small being placed on the plate. She left. My heart was beating fast. Maybe 10-15 minutes later, I heard other footsteps, heavier, hesitant. They were my dad's. He stopped in the same place. He stayed silent for what seemed like forever. Then I heard his voice, a hoarse murmur so low it could barely be heard. "Go in peace and leave us in peace." I heard the sound of seeds falling into the plate. At that moment, I understood the magnitude of the hole I had gotten us into. My dad, the most stubborn and skeptical man I know, was there at midnight saying goodbye to a clay figurine. His fear was greater than his pride. The next day I got up early. I put Gilbert with the plate full of offerings inside a shoebox. Tanya came to pick me up, and we went to a lake that's on the outskirts of the city. It's a big place with a fairly dense forest area. We didn't say almost anything on the way. When we arrived, we walked a bit into the forest until a point where we could no longer hear the noise from the road. I took the figurine out of the box. I looked at that mocking smile one last time. "Well, Gilbert, the time has come," I said, and my voice came out firm. My house is no longer your place, but now you have a new task. You're going to be the guardian of all this. You're going to take care of the trees, the water, the animals that live here. Good luck, and please." I left the figurine at the base of a large tree with the plate beside it. Tanya and I turned around and left without looking back. In the car, the silence was different. It was no longer tense. It was a silence of relief, but with a strange weight, as if we had survived something we could never explain. The strange things stopped immediately. The nights became silent again. My dad recovered his humor and health little by little. We never touched on this subject at home again. It's a pact of silence. Sometimes when I pass by some craft store and see similar figures, I feel a discomfort in the pit of my stomach. I learned the hard way that desperation makes us open doors that should remain closed forever. To be honest, the place where I live is beautiful. It has greenery that never ends, a smell of wet earth that rises after the rain and seems to clean the air. Even so, almost all my childhood friends left here over time. They went to try their luck in Lowe's Angels. You know how it is. They said there was no future here, that it was living stuck in the middle of nowhere. I don't judge them, but I decided to stay. I had the family business to take care of. We have a small diner right on the edge of the highway that crosses through our little town in Central California. Something simple, a counter, some plastic tables, but the food is good. We serve people coming back from the fields at the end of the day, and occasionally a traveler who gets lost and ends up stopping here to ask for directions, or just to stretch their legs. Life is like that, without big news. On one of those nights, it was already late. Business had ended, and I was about to pull down the metal shutter. That's when I saw a silhouette approaching down the highway. It was a dog, a huge white dog with droopy ears. You could see the bones under its fur. You could tell life hadn't been easy for him. His snout had some old scars, and his way of walking, somewhat sideways, showed he was a frightened animal. But hunger, I suppose, must have been stronger than fear. He stopped at a safe distance and just stood there looking at me. That look of someone asking without needing to make a sound. I've never been much of an animal person, to be honest. I have my reasons, and it breaks my heart to see a dog tied up with a chain, abandoned in the yard as if it were just a furry alarm system. But I couldn't see that animal in that condition. I went inside, took some leftovers from the day, a bit of meat with rice, put it in a somewhat dented aluminum container, and brought it to him with a bowl of water. He waited for me to move away before approaching to eat. He ate quickly, with a desperation that was pitiful. He drank all the water, and when he finished, he didn't wag his tail, didn't make a fuss, nothing. He just gave me one last look and continued on his way, disappearing into the darkness toward town. I thought, well, at least he won't spend one night hungry. But the next morning, when I arrived to open the diner, there he was, lying at the door threshold as if he owned the place. When I got out of my pickup truck, he just lifted his head and stayed watching me. He didn't bark, didn't growl, nothing. He just stayed there. And he spent the whole day like that. I noticed he followed with strange care every person who entered or left. At that moment, I understood, accepting my fate. I now had a dog. And so the days went by. I decided to call him Bear. The name just came to my head out of nowhere, but then I thought it suited him. He was like a silent watchman at the diner's door. He wasn't a party dog asking for affection. He stayed there in his corner and just observed. The regular customers got used to him, even threw him a piece of bread from time to time. Bear didn't pay them much attention. It seemed like he was there for another reason. He had become part of the routine, a constant and quiet presence that I didn't know I needed. The afternoon when everything changed had been slow for customers. It had rained a bit earlier, and the smell of wet asphalt and earth was still in the air. Inside, there was only old Mr. Rodriguez, a taxi driver from the region who was finishing a steak with fries calmly. I was already thinking about starting to clean to close earlier. That's when two young men entered. I had never seen them around here. They were young, came sweaty, looking like they had walked quite a bit under the sun that had been beating down before the rain. But there was something in their way of acting, an agitation, an anxiety that didn't fit with the calm of the place. Before they even reached the counter, Bear got up. He didn't bark. What he did was more intimidating. He let out a low, continuous growl that seemed to come from deep in his chest. He planted himself right at the entrance without taking his eyes off the two of them, and the hair on his back stood up completely. I felt embarrassed, of course. "Hey, boy, get out of there, let people pass," I said, trying to play it down. I gestured for him to move, but Bear didn't budge. He continued with that grave sound vibrating in the air. The young men stopped, clearly nervous because of the dog. We were just going to look at the menu," one of them said, unable to hide his nervousness, looking more at the dog than at me. They gave a quick look at the board where I write the daily special. They exchanged a strange glance, and the same guy spoke again, already backing away. It's not going to work out. We're short on money. We'll find something else around here. Thanks." They left quickly, taking a wide turn to avoid passing near Bear. I took a deep breath, a bit annoyed. They could have been customers, and there was the dog scaring people away. When I turned back inside, Mr. Rodriguez had left his fork aside and was looking at me with a serious expression. He nodded toward the door. "Did you notice?" he asked. "Notice what, Mr. Rodriguez?" I replied, drying a glass. "Didn't you see? Those two were carrying knives on their belts, big hunting knives. I saw the handle on one of them when his shirt lifted a bit, the skinny one. They were gripping the handles nervously. I stopped doing what I was doing. The glass stayed in my hand. I looked at him, then at the door where Bear had now lain down again, but with his head still up, alert. "They were going to rob you, kid," he completed with a low voice. "They were going to take whatever you had, and my little money too. It was this one who saved our hides." He smelled the evil from far away. That night I gave Bear the best piece of meat I had. When I locked everything up and got ready to go home, he didn't wait for any order. As soon as I opened the door of my old pickup truck, he took his distance and jumped into the truck bed. He settled in a corner and stayed there quietly. It was the first time he had done that, and while I drove down the dark highway with him back there, I understood. I hadn't just got myself a dog, I had got myself a guardian. The years pass in a way you don't even notice. The life of someone who runs a small business is like that, one day stuck to another. And the routine with Bear became my own routine. In the morning, he was already waiting for me outside the house. We'd go to the diner in the truck. He'd spend the day at his door, and at night, we'd return. A faithful guardian. I never had problems with strange people again, and I learned to trust his instinct. If Bear growled at someone, I was already on alert. The time that was good for me, however, was hard on him. The white fur began to take on a yellowish tone in some parts. He became slower to get up. His bones were already complaining. The jump to get in the truck bed, which used to be one movement, became an effort. First, he'd try once, twice. Then he started staying there standing, looking at me, waiting. I made him a little wooden ramp, a rough thing, but it got me out of trouble. My friends, the few who were still around and passed by there, would tease me. They said I treated the dog better than people. Maybe it was true. Until one day he left. It was at the end of a Tuesday afternoon. I was closing things up. I called him so we could go, and nothing. It seemed strange to me. I went out to look for him and saw him from behind, walking slowly down the highway shoulder, the same path he had arrived on so many years before. "Bear, hey Bear," I shouted. He didn't turn around. He continued his slow, determined pace and disappeared around a curve. I didn't panic at the moment. I thought he had gone to do his business, that maybe in a while he'd come back. He knows the way home, I told myself. But night came and nothing. That night I barely slept. I left the ramp on the truck, the tailgate open. I put fresh food and water outside the house door. I knew that if he came back, he'd wait for me there. But when dawn broke, the food was untouched. The silence inside the house was heavy. At the diner, the emptiness at the door was a hole I couldn't ignore. I spent the following days in a dull anguish. After work, I'd take the truck and drive miles down the highway with the high beams on, calling him. I asked everyone I knew, truckers, people from neighboring ranches. No one had seen him. Hope was diminishing. Even so, for almost 2 weeks, every single day I kept leaving the container with food and water outside. I knew it was useless, but I couldn't stop. It was as if by stopping, I was giving up on him completely. About 3 weeks passed. By then I had already lost hope. I had put away the food container and the little wooden ramp. The emptiness in my chest was still there, but life demands that you continue, right? I got used to the silence. It was a Friday night. I had stayed later to do inventory. When I finally finished, I turned off the diner lights and went out. The only sound was crickets and the metal shutter slowly coming down. That's when I saw him, sitting across the highway under the weak, yellowish light of the only street lamp there. The white silhouette was unmistakable. I felt such great relief that my legs trembled. It was him. "Bear," I called with a broken voice. "You came back, my friend." I went in his direction, expecting him to come running, all clumsy as he was, but he didn't move. He stayed there sitting, just looking at me. He got up but took a few steps back, maintaining the distance between us. That gave me a strange chill. "What's wrong, boy? It's me, Vincent." I got to about 15 feet from him and stopped. The street lamp light hit his eyes, but it wasn't the same shine. There was something still, like glass. His gaze seemed more focused, more intelligent, but in a cold way. It was like looking at a strange person, not my dog. We stayed there looking at each other intently for a good while. Me not understanding anything, and him completely motionless. I decided not to force it. Maybe he was sick, scared. I went back to the truck, opened the driver's door, and got in. And then the strangest thing happened. He walked around the vehicle, and with a jump I hadn't seen him make in years, got into the truck bed. The sound of his paws hitting the metal was exactly the same as always. I drove home with 1,000 things on my mind. The joy had given way to enormous confusion, to a bad feeling I couldn't explain. When we got home, he jumped out before I even turned off the engine completely. And instead of going to the porch as he always did, he started sniffing every corner of the yard, every bush, every flower pot, as if he had never been there before. Then he went straight to his little wooden house, entered, and lay down in the darkness. I stood at the house door, watching. All I could see were his two eyes shining from inside, a fixed shine that didn't blink. I thought tomorrow, without fail, I'll take him to the vet. He must have some illness. But while I locked the door, a bad feeling settled in my chest. That thing that was out there in my yard looked like Bear, but my heart told me it wasn't him. I didn't sleep well that night. I kept tossing and turning in bed. I heard every creak of the house, the wind on the roof, the wood settling. I tried to convince myself it was just my head, that worry about Bear was making me like this. At some point, I think I fell asleep, and it was in that interval between sleep and wakefulness that I heard it. A bark, it was Bear's bark, unmistakable. Not the warning growl, but that somewhat muffled bark he made when he was dreaming. The sound came from outside, from the yard. I opened my eyes in the darkness of the room. The sound stopped. Everything went silent again, heavy silence. That's when I heard something else, a noise at the front door, a light scratch, like a tree branch hitting the wood. But there was no tree near my door. The sound repeated, a bit louder. Then I heard the metal of the doorknob turn, a minimal screech, almost imperceptible. My whole body went rigid. The first thought was someone is trying to get in. But the second idea came right away and was much worse. Bear was out there. He would never let a stranger approach the house without making a scene. Unless the stranger was him. I got up from bed without making noise. The wooden floor seemed like it was going to scream at any moment. I went to the kitchen. I took the biggest knife I had in the drawer, the meat-cutting one. It's not that I knew what to do with it, but having something in my hand gave me a false sense of control. With my heart racing, I went slowly toward the living room. The living room window looks directly onto the front porch. I moved a millimeter of the curtain, just enough to spy with one eye. And I saw it. The thing that looked like Bear was there, but it wasn't on the ground. It was standing, leaning on its two hind legs with its body stretched in a posture that wasn't an animal's. It was almost human. The front paws were resting on the wall beside the door, and its head was turned looking directly in my direction, looking toward the crack in the curtain where I was. He knew. There was no surprise in his gaze, just that same cold intelligence. He saw me. We stayed like that, me hidden in the darkness of my house, and that imitation standing on my porch, looking at each other. I don't know how long it lasted. For me, it was a lifetime. Then, with the same calm with which he had stood up, he came down, returned to four legs in a fluid way, too natural. He turned his back to the door, went down the porch steps, and walked calmly back to the little wooden house at the back of the yard, disappearing into the darkness. I dropped the knife on the table. My hands were shaking so much I could barely stay standing. I hadn't seen a sick dog, I had seen a monster, and it was in my yard. I spent the rest of the night sitting in the darkness of the living room, waiting for the sun to come up. When the first rays of light entered through the window, I gathered courage and looked outside. The yard was empty, the little wooden house silent. The creature, whatever it was, had gone. That afternoon, old Mr. Rodriguez showed up at the diner. It had been a good while since he had passed by there. He ordered coffee, sat at the counter, and stayed a while in silence, watching me. "So, Vincent," he finally said, blowing the steam from his coffee, "you found the dog." I froze. I stared at him without understanding. "How do you know he had been lost? It's been weeks since he disappeared." He took a sip of coffee and looked toward the highway. "I know because I saw him about a week ago, maybe a bit more, near the old bridge about 6 miles from here. He was at the roadside. I stopped the car, called him, but he didn't even turn around. He just looked at me with a tired look, an end-of-the-party look, you know. Then he went into the woods. I didn't want to follow him. I thought he wanted to be alone." Mr. Rodriguez looked at me with some pity. "A dog like that, a real companion, doesn't like the owner to see him die. They hide to spare us the suffering. If I were you, I'd go look for him to give him a proper burial." His words echoed with what I had seen the night before. The sadness for my friend came first, but right away I got chills, because if my bear had been dead around here for more than a week, what was that thing that came to my house last night? I told my mom everything when I got back. She, who is a countrywoman with strong beliefs, listened to everything in silence, and then made the sign of the cross. "My son," she said with a very serious voice, "pay attention. What comes back from the road at night in silence, what takes the shape of what you love, whether animal or person, but acts different with an empty gaze. Never trust it, never let it in. We call it the hollow. It's something that takes advantage of one's nostalgia to try to steal a place that isn't its own. I don't know if this is a belief only from our town or other places, but it made terrible sense to me. I didn't have the courage to move Bear's body. I let my friend rest where he chose. But the next day I went back there with a handful of wildflower seeds that I took from my mom's garden. I scattered the seeds over the earth where he was. Time passed and the flowers grew. Today, every time I pass by the old bridge in my truck, I slow down, and from the highway I can see a bunch of colorful flowers, pink, yellow, white, growing strong in the middle of the woods. Bear's flowers are the only image of him I want to keep in my memory. The rest, I try every day to forget. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another special gathering. Before we begin, I'd love to know who's joining me tonight. Drop a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is there. Let's dive into our first story. I think the moment a person decides to leave everything behind doesn't come with thunder or explosions. For me and for Alina, at least, it was the opposite. It was the weight of a silence that had been growing between us for years. Inside an apartment we could barely afford in a city that never stopped making noise, we'd look at each other at the end of the day and have nothing left to say. It was just exhaustion, a bone-deep weariness from working shifts that never aligned, raising our 6-year-old daughter Sarah in a place where kindness had become a luxury item. The idea of leaving came from someone I knew from my old job. He talked about a place, a forgotten settlement in the mountains of Northern California, a few hours from Sacramento. He said the land was cheap and the community lived almost entirely off-grid. At the time, it seemed crazy, but the seed took root in our exhaustion. We wanted Sarah to know what it felt like to walk on real earth, to learn the names of birds. To be honest, I think we wanted that for ourselves too, a fresh start without an audience. The road to get there was already a warning. After leaving the main highway, you take a patched asphalt road that winds upward through the hills. At a certain point, with no sign whatsoever, there's a dirt road entrance. That's where it begins. The car shook violently, brush scraping the paint on both sides, and with each curve the forest seemed denser, more ancient. Alina had bright, anxious eyes. All I could think about was whether the engine would hold up. When the forest finally opened up, you saw the place. A handful of dark wooden houses with simple roofs scattered around an old farmhouse with peeling white paint that seemed to be the center of everything. The afternoon mist was already beginning to descend from the hillside, muffling all sounds. The smell was wet grass and wood smoke, a silence we didn't know, a real silence. For a moment I thought, this is it. We found it. Our cabin was one of the most isolated, small, smelling of old wood and time. But from the kitchen window, we could only see forest. No neighbors, no fences, no power lines. The peace we dreamed of was there, almost tangible, and the people, that's where things started to seem strange to me. They were so kind it made me suspicious. On the first day, a woman appeared with cornbread still warm from the oven. On the second, a neighbor came to offer help splitting the firewood they'd left stacked for us. Everyone smiled and asked questions, but their eyes measured us. I can't explain it. Alina thought it was wonderful. She said it was the human warmth missing from our lives. I just felt like we were being evaluated. The community leader, the one everyone respected, was Mr. Clarence. A man of about 70, maybe older, thin with sun-weathered skin and a perfectly trimmed white beard. He walked slowly with a smooth wooden walking stick and wore a short-brimmed straw hat, even indoors. He came to visit us on the third day. Alina made coffee immediately, all excited. Sarah, who's usually shy, sat quietly on her lap while he told stories about the mountain animals. His voice was gentle, almost a whisper, but it had a weight that forced you to pay attention. He didn't give orders, just made suggestions. He talked about how life there worked based on balance, mutual aid, listening to what the earth asked for. Alina drank in every word. All I could notice was how his gaze swept every corner of our house, as if taking inventory. Here we take care of each other and we take care of our land, he said, looking directly at me for the first time. The soil has memory. If you step with respect, it returns with abundance. It was after that when I really started noticing the details. The children played together, yes, but always in a designated area within sight of some adult. There was no chaotic running around, no shouting. It seemed like a theater performance. One day, Sarah wanted to go with a new little friend to the edge of the creek that ran a bit into the forest. They were about to run off when the other girl's mother, a woman named Grace, stopped them. She didn't raise her voice, simply crouched in front of both girls and said with a serene smile, "Not yet, my flowers. Let the forest get used to your scent first." That phrase kept hammering in my head. What the hell did that mean? When I mentioned it to Alina that night, she just shrugged. "Oh honey, it's just their way of speaking. Things people who have lived their whole lives here say. You don't have to analyze everything." But I needed to, because it wasn't just the way of speaking. It was the way they moved together. The way Sunday lunches at the farmhouse began with a minute of silence with closed eyes to harmonize thoughts. It was a heavy, loaded silence. I felt like I wasn't the only one there pretending. I was being watched, and the worst part was that my wife and daughter were becoming part of the surveillance. I started walking alone, getting away from the settlement in my free time, using the excuse that I needed exercise. Really, I was hunting, looking for anything that would prove I wasn't going crazy. And I found it. First were the symbols, strange spirals with 3 points coming out of the center, like roots or branches. They were carved into more distant trees near the creek and painted on some large rocks with a dark, reddish ink. When I asked a neighbor what they were, he smiled and said it was the earth signature. A signature. The confirmation that something was terribly wrong came on a Tuesday night. I'd gone to help repair a fence at the community workshop, and it got late. The sun had set, and the darkness was complete except for my flashlight. As I was heading back, I passed behind one of the family's houses, the Hoffmans, and heard low voices. I turned off my flashlight instinctively and hid behind a pile of firewood. Their son, a boy of about 16 or 17, was kneeling on the damp earth. The father stood in front of him, the mother to one side with crossed arms. There was no anger, no shouting. That's what scared me most, mister. Hoffman spoke with chilling calm. You have to empty your head, he said, his voice firm and low. Earnest makes noise, and the earth doesn't like noise. It only listens to those who humble themselves. Ask forgiveness for your will. The boy murmured something too low for me to understand. He was trembling, you could see his shoulders shaking. Louder, ordered the mother without emotion. It needs to hear that you repent. I stayed there, crouched in the darkness with a bitter taste in my mouth. I wanted to jump up, scream, do something, but my body wouldn't respond. This wasn't punishment, it was ritual. Breaking, they were deliberately breaking their own son. I left without making a sound, my legs feeling heavy. I got home and Alina was reading on the couch with Sarah already asleep. I couldn't contain myself. I told her everything, my voice coming out more shaky than I wanted. I told her about the boy kneeling in the darkness, about the father's words, about the mother's coldness. I expected her to be horrified, to finally see. She just closed her book slowly and looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. It was pity for me. You don't understand, do you? She said, and her voice was almost like Mr. Clarence's. You can only see what's strange, not the purpose. What if they're right? Here Sarah isn't in danger. Here people take care of each other. They take care, I almost shouted. Alina, they were humiliating that boy. They were teaching, she corrected, now with terrifying firmness. They were ensuring balance. It was Clarence who taught us, sometimes for a tree to grow strong, we have to prune the stubborn branches. That night I was certain, I wasn't fighting just against a strange commune. I was fighting against the woman I loved to save our daughter. And I was losing. After that night, an enormous silence grew between Alina and me. We barely looked at each other. I started sleeping on the couch with the excuse that I was snoring too much. She didn't protest. We lived in the same house but in different worlds. Her world was full of purposes, of certainties whispered by Clarence. Mine was a pit of fear. The last straw, the moment I knew there was no going back, was a Saturday afternoon. Alina came back from the community garden with her face glowing, an expression I hadn't seen in years. She sat in front of me on the porch and took my hands. The gesture was so unexpected that I pulled back for a moment. I had a talk with Mr. Clarence, she said, her voice full of an emotion that turned my stomach. He said that Sarah, she has a special energy, a light that the earth recognizes. I stayed quiet waiting. At the next full moon there will be a special ceremony, a blessing. And he gave me the honor, she paused, eyes tearful. The honor of preparing our daughter to receive that blessing, preparing. That word hung in the air. I knew I couldn't show anything. I forced a smile, nodded, said that was great. But in that instant, all I could think about was the face of that boy kneeling in the darkness. What did it mean to prepare a 6-year-old girl? The next day I went out again, but this time I had a destination. I followed the trail of symbols on the trees, going deeper into the forest than I ever had before. The air grew denser, colder. There was a point where the birds fell silent. That's when I smelled it, a humid, penetrating stench, a mixture of disturbed earth and something else. Something vaguely metallic, like old meat. And then I saw the place. It wasn't a natural clearing. It looked like the trees had been forced to grow backward, opening an almost perfect circle. In the center was a large, flat rock, dark and stained, surrounded by smaller stones, all marked with that same spiral. The silence there was different. It was a silence that weighed, that watched. I didn't need anything. I had absolute certainty that this was their altar, the place of the so-called blessing. I returned home before sunset. Alina was singing in the kitchen while preparing dinner. Sarah was drawing on the living room floor. I looked at both of them and understood that I could no longer count on my wife. Her love for this place, for the promise of peace, was greater than fear. And that love was going to cost us our daughter. That same night, I started planning our escape, just mine and Sarah's. The idea hurt like a broken bone, but the image of that dark rock in the middle of the forest was all that drove me. I planned everything for the night of the monthly celebration, a week before the full moon. It was the only night I was sure the entire community would be locked inside the farmhouse for hours, chanting their strange songs. I spent the previous days feigning a normalcy that made me sick, while Alina separated herbs for Sarah's so-called preparation. In secret, I packed a backpack, documents, what little money we had, a water bottle, and Sarah's worn stuffed axolotl, the little animal she couldn't sleep without. The rest, photos, clothes, tools, I left behind. They were just things. I'd parked our truck a bit farther away, around a curve in the dirt road, hidden by tall ferns. The tank was full, the engine checked by me in the early morning hours in secret. Everything ready. At the agreed time, I waited for the lights in the settlement to go out one by one, and for the collective voice of chanting to begin rising from the farmhouse. It was a deep, monotonous sound that seemed to make the air itself vibrate. I went to Sarah's room. She was sleeping with a serene face. My plan was to take her in my arms, wrapped in her blanket, and simply leave. Disappear. But when I touched the handle of her bedroom door, the door opened from inside. Alina was standing there in the darkness. For a second I froze. It's over, I thought. She's going to scream, but she didn't scream. Her face was wet with silent tears, and her eyes bulged with a terror I'd never seen in anyone. Her hands were shaking, and in one of them she held a small pruning knife. She dropped it to the floor as if it burned. It was pure fear with no room for anything else. She held a small flashlight, the light muffled by a handkerchief. "I know what you're going to do," she whispered, her voice broken. "Wait for me." I didn't ask what made her change her mind. I didn't want to know the details of what Clarence had asked of her. It was enough to see her state to understand it was something monstrous. Something in the preparation of our daughter had awakened her forever. She moved first. I took Sarah, who didn't even stir, heavy and warm against my chest. Every step on the wooden floor seemed to make an absurd noise. The chanting coming from the farmhouse seemed to push us, a constant reminder of the time we didn't have. We ran crouched through the darkness of our own yard. The night's cold cut through, but adrenaline kept me warm. We reached the truck. The click of the door opening seemed like thunder in the silence. We got in. I laid Sarah down on the seat between us. Alina was shaking so hard she could barely close her own door. I turned the key. The engine protested, coughed once, and started. In that instant, the chanting in the settlement stopped, total silence. They knew I pressed the accelerator without thinking. The truck squealed its tires on the dirt, and I accelerated into the darkness with only the memory of the road and the weak moonlight filtering through the leaves. Behind us, the silence coming from the settlement was the most terrifying thing. It was a silence that judged. The forest seemed to have awakened. It wasn't just my imagination, my paranoia. Lena felt it too. She grabbed my arm with white knuckles. The road I'd memorized seemed wrong. The curves sharper, the trees closer. Thick branches dragged across the roof with a scratchy, rhythmic sound. It wasn't brush scraping by chance. They were long, insistent fingers looking for a crack. Come back. A whisper came from outside my window. It was Alina's voice, but the real Alina was next to me with her face bathed in tears, hugging our daughter. "Don't listen," she said, her voice breaking. "Don't look back." Then, around a curve, an enormous trunk blocked the path, a trunk that hadn't been there that afternoon. I know it hadn't been there. Braking was impossible. I turned the wheel with all my strength, taking the truck into the forest. The car shook violently with the sound of metal denting and branches breaking. I don't know how, but I managed to get back on the road just after. I kept accelerating. It was only fear that made me keep accelerating. I can't say for how long I drove like that, fighting against the road that was falling apart in front of me. But then, suddenly, the rattling stopped. The tires found the smoothness of asphalt. We'd made it out. The state highway was there, empty, grayish under the dawn light that was beginning to break. The forest remained behind, a dark, silent wall in the rearview mirror. We didn't celebrate. We didn't say a word. I just kept driving as far as I could. 6 months have passed. We moved to a simple little house on the outskirts of a small town, a place with nothing special, a normal place. We don't talk about what happened. It's a silent agreement. We try to live as if those months had been a nightmare that ended when we woke up. But no night's sleep erases that. That ancient silence between Alina and me returned, but now it's a different silence, a silence full of what we lived through there. Yesterday I was looking out the kitchen window, watching Sarah play in our tiny yard, a patch of sparse grass. She was crouched down, very concentrated, humming a low, repetitive melody, one of the settlement's chants. I felt a chill instantly. I went outside to see what she was doing. She'd gathered small twigs and pebbles, and with them was drawing shapes in the dirt. They were spirals with 3 points coming out of the center. I crouched next to her and asked in the calmest voice I could find, "Sweetie, what is that you're doing?" Sarah looked at me with the innocence of her 6 years, a slight smile on her face, and said the most natural thing in the world. The earth asked me to. Good evening. My name is Jorge, and I don't even know where to begin telling this story. Maybe with the smell of hot dust, you know. That smell that rises from the earth when the sun burns it. For months, our life had that smell. The ranch that was once my grandfather's and my father's livelihood had become barren land, cracked soil, hard as stone. The corn plants I tried to save looked like dry sticks stuck in the dust. Inside the house, things weren't much better. A humble brick house with unfinished plaster and tiles that got so hot the air inside felt heavy, hard to breathe. It was just me and my son Marcus, 6 years old. His mother couldn't take the poverty. She went to Phoenix to try her luck. I don't blame her. Who in their right mind would want to stay and watch the end? And the end seemed close. We'd already eaten almost everything we had stored. There was a little corn flour left and the bottom of a sack of beans. An adult's hunger, well, you can fool it somehow, drink water, keep busy. But a child's hunger is different. It's a silence that screams. Marcus no longer ran around the yard. He had no energy to play with the skinny dog that still insisted on staying around. He spent most of the day sitting on the front step, in the small strip of shade, just staring at nothing. That destroyed me. Every night I'd lie in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to his weak breathing on the mattress next to mine. Desperation would come in that moment, something that starts in the pit of your stomach, an oppression that rises to your throat. I'd think about leaving, taking the boy and trying our luck somewhere else. But go where? With what money? I'd look at that horizon without a single cloud and only feel dryness inside and out. There was nowhere to run, and that was my fear. It wasn't death. It was having to watch Marcus fade away little by little, right in front of me. I was cornered, and a cornered person without hope does anything. It was on one of those nights, about 2 days after I divided the last handful of beans with Marcus, that everything changed. The air was still, hot to the point of suffocation. I was outside sitting on the steps because inside the house was impossible. The silence was total. Even the crickets seemed to have given up. That's when I saw him. A figure coming along the dirt path, a dark silhouette moving slowly in the dust. My first instinct was to go inside and lock the door. Nobody walked around there at that hour of night, but I stayed seated, watching. As he got closer, I saw it was a man, an older guy dressed in dark clothes in a way that didn't fit our place. He looked like a salesman or one of those old-time traveling merchants. He stopped in front of my barbed wire fence and took off his hat, fanning his face. "Good evening, friend. Seems like the rain has forgotten this piece of land, hasn't it?" His voice was calm, even a bit tired. I just nodded, not knowing what to say. "It's good land, this land of yours," he continued, looking around at the dead terrain. "It's just thirsty, very tired." He looked at me in a strange way, a look that seemed to read you from inside. I stood up, suspicious. "What do you need? We don't have anything to offer." He gave a small smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I didn't come to ask, I came to offer." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small cloth package. From inside, he took out 5 candles made of dark wax, almost black. 4 were identical, and 1 was a bit thicker. "I came to bring the rain back to your field, Jorge." I froze hearing my name. I'd never seen this man in my life. "How do you know my name?" "I know your struggle," he said, ignoring my question, "and I know you'd do anything for the boy." He extended the candles toward me. "It's simple. You're going to stick 1 candle in each corner of your land and wait. This 5th one," he pointed to the thicker candle, "you light inside the house. It's for luck, to illuminate the new life that's about to begin." I stared at those candles, then at the darkness of my house where Marcus slept. Part of me wanted to run from there, but desperation was stronger. What more could I lose? "And what do you want in return?" I asked, my voice barely audible. The man smiled again, put on his hat, and turned around. "Just that you accept my gift." And with that, he began walking back down the same path he'd come from, disappearing into the dust and darkness. That same night, I couldn't sleep. I kept staring at the candles on the table. It seemed like madness, the kind of thing desperate people do, and I was desperate. Before the sun even thought about rising, I took the 4 candles and went to the field. The earth was cold under my feet. I stuck 1 in each corner of the land, exactly as the man had said. The 5th, the thicker one, I left on the kitchen table. I lit it, and its flame was strange. It seemed not to give off smoke, just burned steady and orange. I spent the whole day waiting for a sign, anything. Nothing. The sun was the same, the heat was the same, and the smell of dust was still there. When night fell, I already felt like a complete idiot. I'd fallen for the story of a madman. I went to bed exhausted, and that's when I heard it. First, a strong wind whistling through the window cracks. Then the sound, a downpour so violent it seemed like the sky was falling on the house. Rain that came from nowhere without warning. The next day, the earth was different, a dark, living mud with the smell of life. In less than 3 days, corn shoots tore through the soil with a force I'd never seen. In a week, the cornfield already reached my waist. In 2, I could barely see the other side of the land. A lush corn grew, so dark green it looked blue. The ears were heavy, perfect. The first time Marcus and I ate boiled corn from that harvest, it was a celebration. He ate with such pleasure, smiling with his whole face dirty. I felt like the best father in the world. But over time, I started to notice something. The corn was sweet, but it had an aftertaste, a taste of wet earth with a bitter touch, like rust. It wasn't bad, just strange. Marcus didn't seem to mind. The well water that had dried up months ago returned, but it didn't come back clean. I'd pull up the bucket, and out came dark water, almost black, with a thin, oily layer on top. The dog wouldn't drink it, but the corn plants seemed to adore it. The more I watered them with that water, the more they grew. It was around that time that Marcus began to draw. He'd take pieces of charcoal from the stove and draw on the cement floor of the kitchen. They were always drawings of the cornfield, rows and rows of corn plants, all identical. And in the middle, there was always a stick figure. A very tall stick figure with long arms that almost reached the ground. "And who's that?" I asked him one day, pointing at the drawing. He looked at me with those child's eyes that don't know how to lie. "It's the friend of the field. He takes care of the corn." The neighbors from town, of course, noticed the change. They'd pass by the dirt road and stare open-mouthed at that cornfield that had sprouted from the impossible. Some congratulated me, but with a look of mistrust. Don Ramirez, the store owner, asked me what kind of fertilizer I'd used. I just shrugged, said it was luck, that the rain came at just the right moment. I knew he didn't believe me, but he didn't ask any more questions either. Little by little, people stopped passing by. Abundance had arrived, but along with it came a strange silence, a loneliness I didn't know. Abundance, in the end, doesn't fill the soul. We'd eat, our stomachs would feel heavy, but an hour later it seemed like we had a hole inside. And the cornfield, the cornfield. During the day it was just a plantation that was too big. But when the sun began to set, things changed. The shadows of the corn plants seemed to stretch more than they should. They moved in a strange way, even without a breath of wind. I felt all the time like I was being watched. The thing with Marcus also got worse. He'd spend hours talking to himself facing the cornfield. It was no longer just a child's monologue. He'd make pauses as if he were listening to an answer, and sometimes he'd laugh quietly. One afternoon I was in the kitchen and heard his little voice coming from the yard. "No, he doesn't know. Dad's just sad. He thinks it was luck." I approached the window slowly. He was with his back turned, talking to the plants. I felt a terrible chill. How could he know what I thought? The friend of the field was telling him things, my secrets. The confirmation that I'd made the worst mistake of my life came on one of the few times I needed to go to town to buy kerosene. At Don Ramirez's store, I found Don Samuel, an old man who barely left his house, known for the stories he told. He grabbed my arm with a strength I didn't expect from those bones and took me to a corner. "Boy," he said with a hoarse, low voice, "be careful with that luck that sprouts too fast from the earth." "What are you talking about, Don Samuel?" I asked, playing dumb. His eyes were sunken, full of ancient sadness. "When I was young, a friend of mine had the same luck as you. His dry plot became the greenest place in the region overnight. He got rich, even bought a car. One day he simply disappeared. His wife looked for him, the police looked for him. They never found him. The only thing left was the land, greener and more lush than ever. There are debts that aren't paid with money or animals. There are debts that are paid with yourself." He let me go and left, leaving me standing there in the middle of the store with my heart beating in my throat. I didn't wait any longer. I ran home. Terror hit me hard. I needed to get Marcus out of there. I threw some clothes in a bag, took my son by the hand, and headed out on the road without looking back. Marcus whimpered. He didn't understand the hurry. I just told him we were going for a walk. But the road was different. I walked for almost an hour at a fast pace. The curve that should lead to the bridge over the dry creek seemed never to come. And the sun, which should be almost setting behind me, suddenly seemed to be in front of me. I turned around, confused, trying to take another shortcut I'd known since childhood. I walked and walked with Marcus already tired, asking me to carry him. And when I raised my head, there it was, my house, the tall, dark cornfield, and the little barbed wire fence. I'd walked in a circle. I tried again, toward the other side. The result was the same. It was as if all the roads from that place had twisted in on themselves to always spit me back to the starting point. Defeated, I stopped in front of my property. I looked at the cornfield that seemed to mock me with its impossible green. I looked at the kitchen window and saw inside the solitary flame of the fifth candle, steady, unshakable. That's when I understood. That land was no longer mine. I wasn't the owner of that abundance. I was part of it. I was the guardian, the prisoner. When you have nothing left to lose, a strange courage is born, the courage of a cornered animal. If the land wouldn't let me leave, then the problem was inside the house. I looked again at the window, that solitary, stubborn flame, the candle. Everything had started with the candles. Maybe it would end with it. In my head, the logic was simple. If I put out that flame, the deal would be undone. I entered the house, slamming the door. Marcus, who was sitting on the floor, cowered, scared by my behavior. I didn't pay attention to him. I went straight to the kitchen table. The candle was there on a metal plate. After so many weeks, it had barely diminished in size. The dark wax seemed intact. I took a deep breath and blew with all the strength of my lungs. The flame didn't even tremble. It stayed there, perfectly still, like a painting. I blew again and again. Nothing. It was like blowing against a wall. Panic began to rise up my neck. I tried to put it out with my fingers, but as my hand approached, instead of heat, I felt a strange cold that wouldn't let my hand get close. "Leave it alone, Dad." Marcus's voice sounded tearful from the corner of the living room. "The friend doesn't like it when they move his light." A blind rage hit me, something that made me not think. Against the friend, against the old man, against myself. I took the plate with the candle and lifted it, ready to throw the whole thing to the floor and smash it to pieces. The instant my arm rose, everything changed. The sound of the cornfield outside, which was a whisper, became a roar inside my head. The kitchen walls seemed to dissolve into shadows, and suddenly I was no longer in my house. I was in the middle of the cornfield at night, surrounded by corn plants tall as walls that formed a cage around me. I heard my son's terrified scream, distant, as if coming from another world. And then the traveler's voice resonated everywhere, calm, almost disappointed. "I gave you a light for your new path, Jorge. Why do you insist on returning to darkness?" "This isn't life," I screamed at nothing at the plants. "This is a prison." There was a moment of silence, filled only by the sound of leaves, so loud it seemed like I was going to go deaf. And the voice returned, now with a tone that was pure, cold explanation. "You misunderstood. The candle isn't to illuminate your house. The candle is you. It's your soul burning slowly to feed this land. As long as it's lit, the corn will grow strong. and it will only go out when there's nothing left of you to burn. The vision dissolved in a blink. I was back in the kitchen with my arm raised, holding the plate. Sweat ran down my face. Marcus was crying, huddled in the corner, and in front of me, the flame, immobile, constant. I understood there was no escape. That fire was me, and I was being consumed. That was almost a year ago, and my life today comes down to a single task: keeping that flame lit. I built a small glass box for it, a kind of dome so that no wind, no carelessness would put out my sentence before its time. The irony is that now I protect with my life the same thing that's killing me. We live in abundance. The pantry is always full with the flour I make from the corn. But every bite seems to have a taste of something that's wrong. The worst part isn't that. The worst part is Marcus. We barely talk. He plays alone, always in silence, and he never drew the friend of the field again. Sometimes I catch him looking at me in a strange way, a look that isn't from son to father. It's the way you look at a sick tree, at a dying animal. He knows. The child doesn't understand the details, but he feels it. He looks at me, and I know he feels it, feels that his father is going out. I saved him from hunger of the body, but I condemned him to see me consume, to feed off my own soul. Every night after he falls asleep, I sit in the kitchen chair and stare at the candle. It's my vigil. I no longer see just a flame. I see the things I'm losing. I try to remember things, and they escape me. The memory of my mother's face is already a blur. The sound of Marcus's laughter, a distant echo. The warmth of the sun on my skin, I can barely remember how it was. Everything is being burned slowly to keep that cornfield standing. I'm writing all this. I don't really know why. Maybe just so someone knows, so the story doesn't get lost along with me. The candle has already diminished. It's lost maybe an inch of its original height. It doesn't seem like much for almost a year. But for me, watching it every night, it's like seeing your life drain away bit by bit. And I wonder, what will be worse? The day the flame finally goes out, or the constant fear of knowing that when that happens, the earth will be hungry again and will look for another desperate soul to light the next candle. My name is Ethan, and before everything happened, my life was simple, predictable even. I lived in one of those small towns in rural Texas, where the asphalt looks like it's going to melt at noon, and everyone finds out about everyone else's business before the sun sets. I had my job, nothing fancy, but it paid the bills. I had my lifelong friends, and I had Taylor. We'd been dating for almost 2 years. It was a good, steady relationship, the kind the whole family approves of, and that already has a kind of written script. Engagement, wedding, a house with a yard. I loved Taylor, I really did. Her presence gave me a sense of security, of normalcy, and for a good while I believed that was all I needed. The thing is, you get used to things. You get used to the heat, the dust, the silences, until something or someone breaks it all. For me, the one who broke everything was a person who returned to town at the beginning of that year to finish senior year at the same high school I attended. Their name was Lucas, or at least that was the name I knew. They'd moved with their mom to Dallas several years ago, and the memory I had was of a skinny kid I used to play hide-and-seek with at the little dirt court. But that morning at the school entrance, it wasn't a kid I saw. Now they presented as Luna. They had long hair tied back in a way I'd never seen, with ribbons woven through. They wore loose, colorful clothes and looked at me with an intensity that seemed to know exactly who I was, without any fear of showing it. Me, I was scared. The first few days I tried to ignore them. I pretended I didn't see them, took detours through the hallways. The people at school, of course, didn't let it slide. The comments were whispered but reached me anyway, that they were weird, that they dressed strangely. I just listened from afar, trying to convince myself that it had nothing to do with me. Taylor noticed too. She'd stare at Luna, trying to understand what was up with them. One afternoon after school, she commented, half joking, half serious, "Watch out for your new friend, Ethan. There's something about them that draws attention." I let out a nervous laugh, not knowing what to say. And that feeling of not knowing what to say started becoming routine. The night everything completely fell apart was at Tommy's birthday party. It was at a small ranch, a bit outside of town. There was music blasting from speakers pushed to their limit, colored lights hanging from the trees, and that mix of smell of wet earth and barbecue. I'd already had a few beers, was kind of dizzy, feeling the world spin slowly. And there was Luna. They were dancing in a loose way, like they were in another world. Our eyes met in the middle of the crowd. It was just an instant, but it was enough. They smiled and nodded toward a more secluded corner of the house. I don't remember agreeing, but my legs carried me there. We ended up talking near a mango tree, away from the main noise. Their voice was calm, and the way they looked at me was direct, unfiltered. At some point, they kissed me, or I kissed them. The truth is I don't know who took the initiative. I just know it happened. It was a quick, warm kiss that left me not thinking about anything else for a few seconds. But it was also a kiss that brought a strange chill right after. Because as soon as we separated, I heard a little laugh coming from the darkness. "Well, well, Ethan." The voice was Victor's, a guy from senior year who was always where he wasn't called. He just said that and left, laughing under his breath. In that moment, I felt my stomach turn, a sensation that didn't leave me for days. The next day at school, the air felt different. Or maybe it was me who was different. I felt the stares. Nobody said anything to my face. Of course, small-town poison doesn't work like that. It acts in the silences, in conversations that stop when you arrive, in the way people look at you a second too long. Victor's laugh seemed to echo in every corner. Taylor was also acting strange. She asked me with a calm that wasn't hers if I'd talked to Luna at the party. I denied it, said I'd barely seen them. The lie came out crooked. She looked at me sideways with a distrust I'd never seen in those eyes. To try to fix everything, to silence that voice in my head, I did the only thing that seemed logical at the moment. I asked Taylor to marry me. I asked her right there, in front of the gate, with everyone watching. The smile that spread across her face was like she'd been waiting for that her whole life. And for a few days, I clung to that scene. I repeated to myself that it was the right thing, that what happened with Luna was nothing more than a mistake, a weakness caused by drinking. Except the bad feeling wouldn't go away. And that's when things started appearing. The first was a deer's eye, small and worn, that I found in the middle of my notebooks. It wasn't mine. I'd never had one of those. I thought maybe it had fallen from someone's backpack, who knows. I threw it in the back of a drawer and tried not to think about it anymore. A few days later, I found a ribbon, one of those Saint ribbons already half faded, tucked in my wallet between the bills. I froze. Where had that come from? I went through my wallet, my backpack, my pockets. Nothing. I hadn't bought it. Nobody had given it to me. It was just there. I started feeling a constant chill, a sensation of being watched even when I was alone in my room. Every loud laugh in the school hallway seemed to be about me. Every time I saw Luna from afar with that calm attitude of theirs, I felt a mix of rage and something else, something I didn't have the courage to name. That's when the idea started taking shape in my head. An absurd idea, but one that in my desperation took on a kind of terrible logic. This couldn't be just my thing. It had to be them. Luna was doing something to me, a binding spell, a hex, witchcraft, a working, as the old folks said. It had to be. It was the only explanation that allowed me to keep being myself, the one who was Taylor's boyfriend and who had a normal life ahead of him. My relationship with Taylor started falling apart. She was right to complain. I was absent, distant. Sometimes she'd take my hand and I'd flinch without meaning to. How could I demand that she be present if I couldn't even find myself? "What's happening, Ethan?" she asked me one night, her voice tired. "It seems like you're somewhere else." I didn't know what to answer. Tell the truth? What truth? That I thought I was being bewitched by the new kid at school. It would sound like madness. So I lied, said it was work stress, exhaustion. And each lie only pushed us further apart. The last straw was a Thursday night. I got home late after dropping Taylor off at hers. The argument had been ugly. I entered the house stomping, went straight to my room, and when I opened the door, I froze. There was a circle made of ashes on the floor, right in front of the entrance. And in the middle of the circle, a small figure, a crude doll made of dry branches tied with black thread. I stayed there for a few seconds, unable to move, just staring at that thing. The fear was so strong I could barely breathe. Someone had entered my house. Someone had reached my bedroom door. In an impulse, I took a dustpan and broom and swept all of it up, shaking so hard I almost dropped it. I took it to the back of the yard and threw it as far as I could. I searched the room, looked under the bed, inside the closet. There was nothing else. But the bad vibe stayed, impregnated in the room. I couldn't deny it anymore. I needed help. The next day, instead of going to work, I went to Mrs. Odette's house. She was a woman who lived at the end of a dirt street in a little house with a low gate and a garden full of plants I didn't recognize. Her house always had a strong smell of herbs and fresh coffee. She was a healer. My grandmother always said she had a good hand for curing the evil eye and bad luck. She received me in silence, with a look that seemed to see through you. I asked her to help me. I told her I thought someone had done something to me. My voice came out broken. She made me sit in a wooden chair, took a glass with water and a rue branch. She passed the branch over my body from head to toe while murmuring prayers I didn't understand. The water in the glass, according to her, started to bubble. "There's something bad near you, son," she said at the end, her voice grave. "But the evil that afflicts you doesn't come from far away. It comes from a spirit that you yourself feed. If you stop giving it strength, it dies of hunger." I left there more scared than when I entered. For me, those words were confirmation. The spirit I was feeding could only be Luna's influence over me. Mrs. Odette had seen it. It was real. And if it was real, I needed to make it stop at any cost. Mrs. Odette's confirmation gave me a kind of twisted courage, the courage born of desperation. If it was a war, I wasn't going to take the hits in silence anymore. I was going to confront the source of all this. I waited after the last class the next afternoon. I stayed near the gate, feeling my stomach churn. When Luna came out, they were walking with that same tranquility as always, which now seemed like mockery to me. I stood in front of them, blocking their path. Several students, leaving, started walking slower to see the scene. "Can we talk?" My voice sounded harder than I'd planned. They just raised an eyebrow, waiting. "Why are you doing this to me?" I let out, unable to control myself. Luna blinked, genuinely confused. "Doing what, Ethan?" "You know perfectly well," I almost shouted, and some people stopped completely to watch. "The kiss, the stares, and the things you leave me. The witchcraft. You're bewitching me to confuse me, to ruin my relationship." A heavy silence fell around us. Luna looked at me, and for the first time I saw something beyond the calm. I saw a deep wound. They let out a laugh, but it was a laugh with no humor in it. Sad. "Ethan," they said, their voice low, but firm enough for only me to hear. "I don't need any witchcraft for you to feel what you feel. The problem is you don't have the courage to face it. The only person bewitching you here is yourself." That destroyed me. I felt my face burn with shame. Without being able to say a word, I turned my back and left, walking fast, almost running, with everyone's stares on my neck. I got home upset. I went to my room and locked the door with the latch. The rage had disappeared, and in its place was only emptiness and a horrible doubt. What if they were right? With trembling hands, I opened the drawer where I'd thrown the deer's eye. I took my wallet and pulled out the saint's ribbon. I looked at those two objects, forcing my mind to go back, to remember. The ribbon was blue, faded. I remembered a trip I'd taken with my parents years ago to the coast of South Padre Island. One of those day trips. I'd bought the ribbon from a vendor on the beach and kept it in my wallet, then forgot about it completely. The deer's eye was small, smooth from time. And then the image came, clear as a photo, my grandfather sitting on the porch, holding an identical one, saying it was to ward off envy. He died 3 years ago. I must have taken it from his things and kept it as a quiet memory. It wasn't Luna. It wasn't witchcraft. They were pieces of myself, forgotten fragments of my own life that my panicked mind had transformed into weapons of a war that only existed in my head. The only mystery left was the circle of ashes that I couldn't explain. Sometimes, in the silence of night, I still wonder if it wasn't me myself. In a moment, my memory simply erased. But suddenly, it no longer seemed like the center of everything. It was just an anomaly. The only spell there was my own fear. The monster of the story was me. And locked in that room, I finally understood the magnitude of the stupidity I'd committed. That night the sky fell, one of those summer storms with lightning that tore through the darkness and thunder that made the windows shake. The power, as always, didn't hold up and went out. I stayed in the half-light, listening to the rain pound the roof hard. My grandmother used to say that on nights like that, you shouldn't leave the house. That's when spirits wander free. But I couldn't stay still. I opened the door and went out into the rain. I didn't care about getting soaked. The icy water on my face seemed like the only real thing in that moment. I walked aimlessly through the flooded, deserted streets. The town seemed different, washed and somber. I passed in front of the school, in front of Tommy's house, retracing the path of my mistakes. And then I saw them. Luna was standing near the neighborhood basketball court, soaked by the rain, clothes clinging to their body. They were just there, watching the storm, calm. It seemed like they were waiting for me. My first reaction was to turn around and flee, but my legs didn't obey. I walked toward them, trembling inside, no longer from cold. "What are you doing here?" I asked, my voice almost disappearing in the sound of the water. "I was waiting for you," they answered without surprise. All the speech I'd rehearsed, all the rage, all the confusion, everything dissolved. What was left was just exhaustion. "I don't understand anything," I said, feeling a knot in my throat. "I don't know why I feel this way. I really thought it was a spell. I thought you'd done something to me." Luna looked at me with those eyes that seemed to pierce any defense. "I never did anything to you, Ethan. What you feel is yours. It always has been." The tears finally came, mixing with the rain on my face. "It can't be. I'm Taylor's boyfriend. I'm not." The word got stuck. I couldn't say it because deep down, I'd known since the first time I saw them at the school gate. What I called a spell was just the name I gave to my own fear. "I'm scared," I finally confessed. "I was too," they said with a softness that calmed me. "But being scared doesn't stop you from being who you are. It just stops you from living." We stayed in silence for a time that seemed enormous. The rain started to lessen, but I didn't move. I moved a little closer, not for a kiss, not yet. Just to be close, to not feel so alone in that war. "I don't want to run anymore," I said. They smiled, a small, sideways smile. "Then stay." And I stayed there on the wet street while the world dried around us. There was no curse. The problem was me, and only then was I starting to understand it. Well, friends, these were today's stories. I hope with all my heart that you enjoyed them. I upload new videos every day, and it would give me great pleasure to see you in the next ones. Now on the screen, I'm leaving 2 other good videos that I'm sure you'll love. A hug from Dom, and I'll see you there. You made it to the end of the stories. That means it's the perfect time to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. And if you haven't already, leave a like and drop a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have a great time relaxing, and good night.